Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 annual conference of the European Partnership for Alternative Approaches to Animal Testing. I'm Brian Maguire. It's my pleasure to moderate this conference today. And today we'll explore 15 years of contribution to the 3Rs, as well as report on EPAA achievements and milestones. We'll announce the EPAA 3R Science Prize winner, and we'll discuss current and future challenges on the way towards human-based testing models. If you want to contribute online, please tag at EPAA3RS or hashtag 3RS or also hashtag EPAA15. Now, for the welcome address, it's my privilege to introduce Virginijus Sinkevičius, the EU Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries. Commissioner, welcome.
And good afternoon to everyone. Of course, good afternoon to you all, and of course, on behalf of the European Commission, I would like to welcome everyone to the conference. This is my first partnership for alternatives to animal testing event, though the partnership is already 15 years old. It's an opportunity to take stock of progress on alternatives to animal testing and to lay the plans for its future. We were planning a much bigger event to mark those 15 years together with our partners from industry, but we are meeting online for obvious reasons. And of course, I hope you are all coping with these difficult times well, the best you can. Hopefully, we will be able to meet again in more flexible, less rigid circumstances very soon. But today we must make the best of this situation. We have a lot to decide, a lot to share and learn from each other, and important discussions to have about the path to take for the next 5 years. We have a lot to be proud of because this partnership is quite unique. It brings together 5 directorates general from the European Commission, 7 industry sectors, and a vast pool of knowledge and expertise from academia and laboratories, as well as the European Parliament and civil society. Together, we work towards a common cause, our desire to move away from animal-based science for risk assessment. We all want to reduce the number of animals used and ensure the welfare of animals that still needs to be used for testing. In other words, we still believe in the 3R principle and are determined to advance on reduction, refinement, and replacement of animals in testing and science. It looks good on paper, but does it really work? What have we actually achieved? You know the answer, of course, and I have to say that I am very impressed by the latest results, not just by the long list of achievements and activities since the creation of this partnership, but especially by the number and quality of achievements in the very recent past, despite challenging circumstances. The core of this partnership are the collaborative projects. Work on the 10 current projects has continued almost unaffected by the pandemic. The new action program for the next 5 years has been produced and adopted. 50 workshops have been organized and an impressive 34 scientific publications are now on the books. Many more activities from training and dissemination and cooperation partnerships have also taken place, and not just in Europe. For the past 15 years, the partnership has been an important driver of progress. This is thanks to, of course, sustained commitment and engagement of industry partners. At the Commission, together with my fellow commissioners responsible for the various services involved in the partnership, we remain fully committed to this partnership. It works because what we have is a unique platform for targeted collaboration. By bringing together the regulators at the Commission and industry partners who implemented the rules, we advanced the development, validation, and acceptance of alternative methods. The result is less suffering for the animals concerned. It's no secret that regulatory safety testing and toxicology in general is a complex field. Progress in one area can bring new requirements in other areas, leading to more animal testing in the short term. That makes it very difficult to compare the numbers of animals used from different periods. Despite that, the latest report on statistics that was published by the Commission at the beginning of this year does show a downward trend. Over the past 10 years, the number of animals used in science and in testing has been reduced by more than 20%. We're committed to continuing down this path. And with the chemical strategy for sustainability we recently adopted, we have the framework we need to advance on this path in the years to come. There are many good reasons for taking this path. The European citizens care about the welfare of animals and has an interest in the sustainable use of resources. There are also treaty obligations to respect and a range of secondary legislation from REACH to biocides to packaging, labeling, limit the use of animal test methods. They can only be used when no other equivalent method exists. And with the ban on animal testing in cosmetic products from 2013, Europe set a global precedent. This matters on the global stage. Markets are global companies. Markets are global. Companies act globally. And in the long run, the replacement of animal methods will be a global aspiration. And this is why the partnership projects reach out to scientists and partners, not only here within the EU, but also beyond Europe. As you know, the 11th World Congress on Alternatives, scheduled to take place in Maastricht this August, was unfortunately postponed. But our engagement remains the same. We will sponsor a session in August 2021 and also organize a dedicated training on alternative methods. This crisis is also a time for vigilance. It will be very important to avoid slipping back into bad habits. We are living through a severe global health crisis, and one of the greatest challenges we face since World War II, the COVID-19 pandemic, has triggered unprecedented effort for research into diagnostics, treatments, and vaccines. Many of our member companies and their scientists have been involved since the earliest days of this crisis. Massive funding is being made available through fast-track procedures to kickstart research. There is more international cooperation between research teams and institutes than ever before. I'm relieved to see that innovative non-animal methods are already part of these enormous research efforts. Since the beginning of this year, the Commission has earmarked almost 1 billion euros for COVID-19 related research under Horizon 2020. At least 10% of the projects selected after the first expression of interest use alternative to animal testing, and less than 0.2% of the overall budget is used for animal studies. One reason for this is the success of previous projects. EU research has generated tools that immediately swing into action for COVID-19 research. More proof, once again, of the effectiveness of our work so far. But we are here, ladies and gentlemen, because we need to talk about the future. Despite good progress, we are still nowhere near the ultimate goal. As stated in our EU legislation, it will be some time before we are fully replacing animal testing with in vitro and other alternative methods. At the Commission's, we are wholly aware of this, and this is why we are committed to further promote research into advanced tools and methods to replace the use of animal testing. For regulatory purposes, it is very important to continue the dialogue with all stakeholders and to use all fora and initiatives to promote the refinement, reduction, and replacement of animal procedures. We will continue to promote the 3Rs, and together with the partnership, we will help accelerate progress towards the replacement of all animal-based methods. My congratulations to all members and collaborators from industry and the Commission for these achievements and for all your ongoing hard work. Congratulations to the winner of the EPAA Science Prize, which will be presented later this afternoon. I would also like to thank the European Parliament and the Intergroup of Animal Welfare for their continued interest and commitment. I'm particularly welcome and I'm pleased to welcome MEPs and especially Mr. Christian Bousseau today, who will give us the perspectives of the intergroup and participate in our high-level panel discussion this afternoon. We have an exciting program ahead, so I wish you all interesting and, of course, very fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a positive opening message for the conference today. Hopefully we'll stay with us for some time, and also we have the expectation of our prize winner to join us later on as well, so we can look forward to that. Thank you, Commissioner. Our next speaker now is one of two keynote speakers which we have for today. The first is Patrick Mechelen. He's Procter & Gamble Vice President for Global Product Stewardship. Patrick's going to speak today about the adoption of non-animal approaches, the importance of innovation, collaboration, and partnership. Patrick, great to see you. You're on mute. Can you unmute, Patrick, please?
Yeah, I just did, Brian. Thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction, and good afternoon to everybody in the EPAA annual conference. It's a real pleasure of mine to be able to present some of P&G's innovation and learning related to the adoption of the animal alternative methods and next generation risk assessments. Next slides, please, Anna. So at P&G, every change in every product undergoes a safety assessment. And we really do this in the context of products which carry a very broad range of regulatory pathways as well as exposures. As you can see from the slides, we have ingestibles like personal healthcare products, vitamin mineral supplements. A major category for P&G of great importance to our business is what we call our on-me exposure category. And to no surprise, right, this includes our shave care business, our skin and hair care businesses. Detergents and home care products, they have somewhat of a less of direct exposure to the consumers. However, the chemistry which is contained in them can be quite reactive. And we do assess, again, every change in a product undergoes a safety assessments. We do this against a broad range of exposures, but also importantly, against a broad range of regulatory pathways. And as you likely can deduct from the chart that I showed here, based on P&G's portfolio, regulatory pathways vary from medicines, medical devices, cosmetics, OTC drugs, detergents, etc. Next slide, please. Over the last 40 years, P&G has invested a total, actually now more than $450 million in developing and promoting the animal alternative testing methods. We are very proud. Our scientists really invented the first skin allergy testing alternative and have been and continue to be key innovators in read-across science. Today, our daily habits, daily use, we use more than 50 animal testing alternatives, half of which were invented or co-developed by Procter & Gamble. Our experience by applying those new approach methodologies and next generation risk assessment methodologies has been extremely positive. Beyond, of course, the obvious benefits to animal welfare, we have an increased confidence in our predictions of consumer protection. We're also able to link the predictions with an in-depth understanding of the consumer habits and practices and exposures. And we can integrate now mechanistic-based understanding of toxicology, which really brings us at the forefront of safety science. In this journey, we continue and we have greatly benefited from collaboration and partnerships. Collaboration with leading internal animal welfare organizations, academia, industry coalitions, and policymakers. We actively promote alternatives to animal testing towards gaining the regulatory acceptance. In addition, we are proud supporters of the Be Cruelty-Free campaign, and to date, we have several of our brands which are certified as cruelty-free by the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Next slide, please. A lot of the P&G products fall under the on-me or in the on-me exposure category, where skin is really the main venue for exposure. And it's in that area that P&G has and continues to play an essential leadership role in developing next generation risk assessment approaches for skin sensitization. And I really want to share the story of our progress in this area. And it has two common themes. One is the ability and the need to apply emerging science and technology. That's what I call innovation. And secondly, instrumental collaborations and partnerships, both inside the company and outside the company. In the 70s and the 80s, and this is then a time before we had really a deep mechanistic understanding of skin allergy, our focus was on refine and reduce. Like we had the benchmark of the guinea pig maximization test. And efforts by P&G, including Mr. Buehler, who you can see reflected in the Buehler test, basically came forward with a topical application assay based on relevant exposures for P&G products. We also were crucial in the development of the local lymph node assay, which was developed in the 80s and the 90s. This reduced the number of animals which are needed per test and also refined the way animals were treated to reduce pain and stress. And because of the measurement of the immune response became much more objective, the local lymph node assay provided us with a great standard for comparison of validation of replacement methods. And these methods resulted in awards for several P&G scientists over the many years, and also importantly, became OECD technical guidance documents, making them available for broad application and use. But the breakthrough really came in the 90s, when we started to understand and investigate the adverse outcome pathway for sensitization. This allowed us to develop new approach methodologies and also allowed us to better understand molecular and biological pathways which are involved in skin sensitization. This brought us in the important area of replace and led to the development of a series of in vitro, in chemical, and in silico assays. Taking the in chemico approach as an example, our idea was to develop a screening assay which would measure the peptide-allergen interaction, basically the first critical step in sensitization. This was an effort of many years with trial and error sometimes driven by science and led again to the acceptance of the method, the direct peptide reactivity assay as a technical guidance, again available for broad impact and use. In our daily work, we also incorporate many other cell-based assays, and we have developed and we continuously look to integrate them into integrated testing strategies, which are now being applied in next generation risk assessments currently at P&G. We now use these new approach methodologies and next generation risk assessments for decision-making with great confidence on skin sensitization. The second learning we had is that there's a need to build confidence in the approach with broad stakeholder community. First, and at no surprise, I think it takes a united effort from industry and regulatory bodies to achieve validation of methods. Secondly, and even more importantly in our current learning, is that there is a need to build confidence in the next generation risk assessment approach across many stakeholders, and that includes industry as well as regulators. And in that context, the user forum workshops that EPAA organizes on skin sensitization are a key venue where we as P&G and others can help inform and train a broad variety of stakeholders. And as with any new approach, it's often easier to stick with the older way. The new way requests more effort, but we shouldn't let up in that important area. Next slide, please. This curve really shows where we currently are in our journey for new next generation risk assessments for a variety of toxicity endpoints. Our journey is clear. The moonshot is to assure safety without new animal data. It is a step-by-step approach, which is really based on innovation, on strong collaborations, and excellent partnerships. At this point in time, we have several endpoints which have broad impact. And I just talked in a previous slide around skin sensitization, but there are many others. Currently, we are driving intentionally scale in applying read-across for systemic toxicity, reproductive toxicity, and carcinogenicity endpoints. These endpoints have very complex adverse outcome pathways, and they really require an integration of animal alternative methods, read-across approaches, advances in toxicogenomics, etc. As a current consensus, we see that multiple assays used in an integrative way need to be used to obtain similar level of information on hazard, on potency, so that to obtain similar information as from the historical predictive animal models. But we are convinced predicting toxicity can increasingly occur based on the chemical structures and the biological processes the chemical interacts with. And it's the combination with this in-depth understanding and an understanding of exposure that allows with us to use with confidence those next generation risk assessment approaches. They are truly protective for the consumer. That said, clearly, we still have a way to go towards a broad application of those tools. And again, it goes beyond innovation. The dialogue and the collaboration between the risk assessors, the regulators, and many other stakeholders are important to gain the mutual understanding and to grow the confidence in all of those approaches. Next slide, please. P&G has and continues to be an innovator in the area of read-across science. And it was around, I think, the late 90s when we put forward a hypothesis that a one-for-one replacement of animal tests with in vitro animal alternative methods will not work, will not be sufficient for many of the toxicity endpoints. We identified a clear need to iteratively integrate knowledge from human relevant biological pathways and metabolism and represent those into virtual models. That is why P&G developed a read-across framework, and we work intensively, continuously to make improvements on it. We have published several key scientific papers on read-across, including a pivotal framework for analog identification and read-across, publications on uncertainty around read-across, and a development and reproductive toxicity decision tree paper. We continue to advance the science of read-across with some of our current research. Just to cite one example, we apply now toxicogenomic approaches for support of mode of action based connections between the chemical we need to assess and source chemicals that have data. We have and continue to exchange our knowledge with key regulators and stakeholders around the world. We had information sessions with EPAA, with the China regulatory government, asking for endorsement and support to include our approaches into regulatory pathways. We have presented at the QSAR SAR tool team as well, and presented numerous presentations at scientific conferences. We've been an active and a leading member in Cosmetics Europe's long-range science strategy program and the EU program on evaluation to ultimately replace animal testing for hazard and risk assessment of chemicals. Next slide, please. P&G strongly believes in the power of a diverse network. We understand and know it's not enough to create and advance the non-animal alternative approaches. And in order to achieve this broad application, we continue to publish, we continue to seek partnerships, and currently we have a very effective network with over 50 partners globally. We continue to train and present at major scientific conferences where we meet with industry colleagues, NGO colleagues, and also attend regulatory workshops. Some of our partners are on the call today, and I really would like to thank them for the ongoing collaboration and partnership. This truly remains critical if we are to achieve our goal of the adoption of animal testing alternatives for hazard and risk assessment of chemicals. Next slide, please. As P&G, we tremendously value the EPAA partnership. We do see EPAA as a unique forum that stimulates and encourages collaboration across many stakeholders, across different industry sectors, and across the regulatory community and industry experts. We also look forward and actually count on EPAA to play a leadership role in having the non-animal approaches incorporated in regulatory assessment, so that we can transform from regulatory hazard and risk decision making based mainly on in vivo data, to an approach that is based on exposure and incorporates human relevant mechanistic-based decisions. Next slide, please. As P&G, we truly believe that there's a lot to gain from replacement of animal models. We have the obvious and the needed animal welfare benefits, but at the same time, safety assessments of chemicals can become more predictive of human health, which is our ultimate common goal. Safety assessments can be conducted at a lower cost. Safety assessments can be conducted in a quicker time than when relying on the classical endpoint-focused animal testing. There's a lot to gain from the replacement of the animal models. So as one pause, you can ask the question, why is this not happening? And I have two key hypotheses which I wanted to share with the audience. The first one is that there's a lack of confidence with a variety of stakeholders, and that includes industry, in applying the non-animal methods and next-generation risk assessments. This is likely driven by the lack of experience and expertise. My second hypothesis is that there's a reluctance to incorporate progress in science in regulatory decision-making, and that specifically because it requires a major effort and it requires a paradigm shift. But my conclusion is that the best way forward for all, including industry, is to continue to invest in the innovation, to continue to invest in fostering collaborations and partnerships that allow us all together to learn by doing, share experiences, and work towards those approaches that best protect the consumer without the need for animal testing. Next slide, please. And my closing thought is that this is and will continue to be a journey. It will be enabled by embracing the advancements in biology and modeling that ultimately can replace all animal models. And combined with an in-depth understanding on consumer habits and practices and exposures, this can and should lead to successful adoption of next-generation risk assessments. Success in this endeavor will require all of us to contribute and work together. We are on an evolution in this space, but if we really truly want to make progress, I would plead that we join forces and seek towards a revolution in that space. Thank you very much.
Patrick, thank you. The revolutionary in our midst. And I think the summary of the third age of biology is an excellent theme to continue with today as well. We'll see you later on for a discussion. So thank you so much for that. And let me introduce our second keynote speaker today also, is Judith MacArthur-Clark. Judy MacArthur-Clark. Judy is the UK government's International 3Rs Programme Leader, Executive Director, James B. Welfare International as well. She's going to speak about the 3Rs milestones and challenges ahead. Judy, great to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brian. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak to this conference. I mean, this is a really important event, and I'm delighted to be part of the celebration of this 15-year anniversary. I've been asked to speak about milestones and challenges ahead, and clearly there are many milestones and there are many challenges, as we've already heard from the previous speakers. I'm actually going to focus in the short time that I've got available more on the milestone, on the challenges and the milestones. So if I miss out some of the key milestones that people feel they treasure, I apologize at this point, but I'm going to briefly run through some milestones, where I think we are now and the challenges ahead. So of course, the first milestone that one cannot forget is the contribution of Russell and Birch in providing the 3Rs to us as a framework for us to all move forward on. And that was in 1959, 60 years ago, just over 60 years ago. And that's quite amazing that that should be the case so long ago. It's interesting actually to reflect what they thought at the time in terms of why they thought that the 3Rs were important. And they introduced the concept, how they defined the 3Rs. First of all, replacement, they talked about clearly as substitution for conscious living higher animals of insentient material. Reduction was purely the reduction in the numbers of animals used to obtain information of a given amount and precision. And refinement was any decrease in the incidence or severity of inhumane procedures applied to those animals which still have to be used. And the title that they put to the chapter in which they introduced the 3 Rs, was the removal of inhumanity. And I quote here, they say ways in which inhumanity can be and is being diminished or removed. And I think that we've moved on a long way since then, so that instead of focusing just on inhumanity, it's more a focus now on humanity, on being humane, on thinking of animals from a humane perspective. So let's look at some of those milestones. And in fact, sadly, after the 3 Rs were published, not a lot happened for quite some time. And I've noted here the EU directive. I'm looking first of all at some legislative milestones. The EU directive that was passed in 1986. Although it implied that we should be thinking about the 3 Rs, there's no explicit reference. Likewise, the Animal Scientific Procedures Act specifies harm-benefit analysis, but doesn't specifically require the 3 Rs, although that was very much an underpinning philosophy and in the way that the Act was implemented. And other legislation around that time, the mid-80s, was a very good time for legislation to be passed, including in North America, for example. But again, mention of the 3 Rs is not explicit. However, we move forward to 2010 and the EU directive, and there we see there is an explicit requirement to adhere to the 3 Rs. And I think all of us have mentioned that. And that has been transposed into the legislation of all EU member states, and therefore was implemented on January 1st, 2013. And I think also I've made a note here about in 2018 that it's notable, Patrick mentioned some of the work that's being done with China earlier in his talk, that China actually passed regulations that include the 3 Rs and ethical review in the way in which they operate there. So this is something, I use that as an example to show how internationalized the 3 Rs are becoming now. But if we look at the structural milestones, I think that those have been more of measure of progress. So in 1993, we saw the first World Congress on the 3 Rs, the first WC1, and as was mentioned earlier, WC11 would have been in Maastricht this year and has been postponed until next year. 2004, National Centre for the 3 Rs was established in the UK, a very strong move forward as far as the UK was concerned to promoting the 3 Rs, and that followed a government report from the House of Lords in 2002. 2005, of course, how could I miss the recognizing the formation of EPAA and the focus on partnership that I think has been so productive in EPAA. The steering group being Commission and industry combined, the mirror group looking at civil society, academia, animal advocates, and patient groups brought together. Very important partnerships there. Since 2013 and the implementation of the EU directive, the 2010 directive, multiple EU national 3R centres have been formed, which have been very important at a national level. And I'm not going to say more about those now because I know Adrian Smith's going to say more about that later. And then I looked at some other international uptake that we've been leading on. And for example, in China, the first UK-China seminar on the 3Rs was held in 2014. And likewise in Brazil, we led on a seminar in Brazil. And those are just examples of international initiatives that are taking place that many people are participating in, where we're being able to spread the word of the 3Rs globally. And then finally, I noted here in North America, the North American 3Rs Collaborative was established in 2017 and is already making major impact in the thinking in North America. So those are some milestones. Where are we now? And I thought it would be helpful here to think in terms of comparing how we view the 3Rs now, contemporary definitions. And I'm very grateful to Vicky Robinson of NC3Rs for her help in defining what these contemporary views of the 3Rs might be. So in terms of replacement, and we've heard a lot of this from Patrick in his talk, and which I really enjoyed just now, but it's about accelerating the development and use of human relevant tools that are based on latest technology. And so there's so much of that that we can do in terms of achieving replacement. Reduction, instead of just looking at minimizing number of animals, we're looking at appropriately designed and considered animal experiments, and they need to be both robust and reproducible. And I'll come back to that in a little bit more in a moment in terms of challenges. And refinement, I think here we've made big steps. Instead of just thinking about refining the actual procedure we conduct on animals, we're thinking about new in vivo technologies that can benefit both animal welfare and science. And we're considering the whole life experience of animals. An example of lifetime experience, which a lot of focus is going into, is in environmental enrichment. And here we're aiming to functionally simulate natural conditions in a laboratory environment. So we can encourage the expression of species-typical behaviors. And there are many ways in which we're implementing enrichment methods. We can use inanimate approaches where we look at space and complexity of the cage or the pen or the housing environment of the animal. We can provide things within that add complexity, such as what we might call furniture or toys. Trivial terms, but actually very important. It is important to ensure that they do truly help to express species-typical behaviors. And then we can look at animate approaches, which is social contact, for example, contact between conspecifics where it's appropriate for the animal's normal behavior, or human contact. So these are just examples of ways in which we can enrich the environment and therefore look at the entire lifetime experience for the animals. And I show here some pictures. This is cat housing, typical housing for cats in 1968. And here you can see some examples of typical housing for cats today. And as you can see, much of this does not have to be expensive. That housing, that racking system in the middle there is actually an IKEA rack that's been adapted to make it into an appropriate housing system for cats, not an expensive solution. So there's ways in which we can do this, in which we can improve the lifetime experience. More examples of lifetime experience. We're learning more and more about non-aversive handling techniques. Very important, and I've given the example here of handling rodents, where Hurst and West in 2010 first published on tunnel versus tail handling of rodents. The traditional way of handling rodents by the tail was shown clearly to be aversive to the animals. And through producing systems of video tutorials, workshops, and strategies to help to implement this and finding and creating champions who would pursue this and who would advocate this new method. In the UK, we estimate now that we've been able to increase uptake of this non-aversive handling method up to about 60% of all UK mouse establishments. And I'll talk a little bit more about uptake also in a moment. Training animals to volunteer for procedures, very important. So spending a bit of time to be able to get them to understand and be rewarded for volunteering for procedures. And some classic examples of this with non-human primates, pigs, dogs, and so on, presenting for blood sampling. Are just examples of that. But it's also important training scientists and care staff. And I think that the EU directive has really brought that into focus in terms of requiring evidence of competence, because competent scientists, competent care staff leads to improved welfare for the animals and improves the lifetime experience of those animals. And then also, I call it the end of productive life experience, because there comes a point when the animal's role in the experiment is no longer needed. Now, sometimes humane killing is necessary, but other times that we don't need to kill the animals. And more now, we're seeing multiple adoption options. It can be complex to prepare the animals for adoption, but these are becoming recognized options nowadays. So the challenges ahead, I said I wanted to focus on these. And where do we go next? And I think this is a really important area for us to think about. Well, challenge number one will not be surprising. It's finance. I've quoted here, 3R's findings will emerge from other areas of research. Well, of course, there is some truth in this, but it's not enough. We need to be determined to find 3R's solutions, as opposed to thinking that they will just emerge. And as an example here, I've quoted that NC3Rs has spent over 100 million euros over the last 16 years on 3R's research, tools, and technologies. And I know that's a budget that very few other organizations have access to, but it is important to put finance, to put money where our mouth is in terms of this. And through this, they've been able to deliver tools to promote and enable 3Rs. They've been able to deliver research outcomes, which is really important, funding research projects and deliver the outcomes of that to establish 3R's relevant research models. They've been able to actively work to achieve change in policy, practice, and regulations. And mostly that is government funding. And so we need more governments to do likewise. And I think it was impressive to hear what the Commissioner said earlier in terms of the funding that's coming from the European Commission. But globally, we need to see more happening in this area. Finance is core to being able to move forward. And I think we see that also in EPAA and how industry is financing work and partnerships in EPAA. But the second one, and this it picks up again, I think, a bit on what Patrick was referring to at the end, is the cultural barriers to update. Inertia, risk aversion. So on the surface, we get endorsement of 3R's approaches, but limited uptake. And we've seen good progress in education and training, and we're seeing good progress in pharmaceutical R&D to a degree in terms of things like organ on a chip, which was first published in 2010, and people are exploring that very positively now. I know it's sexy science, but actually it's important that it could lead to quite significant replacements. Acute toxicity testing is another example, I think, where industry has given leadership in changing the way in which we look at things and avoiding the conservatism of regulators. But we are still confronted with conservative regulators, conservative publications, and conservative reviewers of publications. So often they require evidence that a 3Rs method is better than the traditional method and seek unnecessary validation studies. Now, we know that some validation absolutely has to take place, but these are unnecessary. Some of these studies are unnecessary, particularly in terms of being able to publish the outcomes of 3Rs experiments. So we need to find ways to transform this. And this has become known as the 3Rs Valley of Death. It's the lag between 3Rs innovations and their uptake. It's the lack of awareness of or confidence in new approaches, inability to publish, and that marks a lot of really remarkable 3Rs replacement research where the papers just struggle to get published in good scientific journals. And solutions are emerging with open access. It's easier to be able to publish this work. NC3Rs has set up their gateway, which makes it also easier for the work that emerges from their funded research to be able to be published. We can also look at technology transfer, another way in which we can improve that lag between innovations and uptake. And I quote here the Crackit Innovation Challenges, which develop 3Rs products for which there is a predetermined demand. And I think that's looking at it the other way around. It's saying, where is the demand and can we actually tackle the demand through a 3Rs approach? And that way, try to avoid this valley of death. It brings academia and industry together in productive relationships, somewhat similar to the way in which EPAA has been operating and has been working very effectively in very diverse areas. Challenge number 3, I think, is a really important one for us to address, is poor reproducibility of research. And we're very familiar, all of us, I'm sure, with the Amgen review that took place in 2012 and the Nature survey in 2016 that shows that this is really an important challenge for science as a whole. But actually, it's incredibly important for this area where animals may be being used in 3Rs research. And we need to improve on reproducibility. And one way to do this is to improve on experimental design. And the Experimental Design Assistant was launched in 2015. It's been improving year by year since then. A lot of it through the being used by scientists and actually being part of the testing and improvement of it and feedback loops of it. And it's a really strong and important tool now, particularly for young scientists who are designing their first experiments. And also the way in which research is reported is really important. And there are many guidelines emerging which have improved the sort of items that need to be reported, particularly in animal-based research. And I've talked here about ARRIVE guidelines, which were first published in 2010 and have recently been republished in version 2, an improved version 2. Again, looking at what can we learn from version 1 and how can we improve upon that. Challenge number 4, I think, is that we need to keep on improving public understanding and acceptance of the way in which science is conducted. And one of the challenges we have there is how to measure success in the 3 Rs, how to measure the number of animals which are not being used or the distress which is not being caused. And that's a real problem for many, I think, and nobody's really come up with a solution on that. We also need to look at openness with the public, scientists speaking out about their research, build trust in science and scientists, help understanding of levels of doubt in science and understand uncertainty. And I think particularly in this era of a pandemic, understanding that there is uncertainty in science and the public understanding that is incredibly important. And I also think that compassion fatigue is something that forms part of this as well. It's experienced by both scientists and care staff where animals are used. And I think it's important that we look at that from a challenge perspective and how can we address that. And my final challenge is about achieving the right balance, focus on retaining public confidence. And in this pictorial here, I talk about the importance of why science quality is always important. But we need to focus on that. And if science loses quality, then the use of the animals is just not justified. Any use of animals or refinement of the use is not justified. But refinement is important to improve animal welfare. And so those 2 components must be balanced. And it's sitting on top of those, the balance of those components sits public confidence. Thank you very much.
Glad you got your screen working. Next on our list today is we're going to talk about the state of the partnerships. This is session 1 in your agenda today. And our first speaker for this is Rob Rugoband. He is the industry co-chair of EPAA and Procter & Gamble, and he's going to speak about the 2020 at a glance EPAA achievements and new action program for 2021 to 25. Rob, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you very much. And welcome everybody to our 15th anniversary annual conference. We would have all hoped to do this in different circumstances, but of course, we're very pleased with the technology. And I'm very proud to be the current industry co-chair for the EPAA partnership. If I can move to the next slide, please. What I would like to cover today is a little bit on the governance, an update on where we are in 2020 with EPAA, and I will talk a little bit about the action program that we updated this year. The commissioner already referred to that. I'll talk about the core of our work, which is the project activities. Third element is the communication and dissemination, which is, of course, a very important activity, as Judy just mentioned. And then I'll provide a little bit of an outlook of what's next. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So the governance structure, that we have the steering committee that is basically leading the EPAA. So my colleague Frans Lampemeyer from DG Grow, myself, we're chairing the industry, so the steering committee meetings that happen about 3-4 times a year. The core of the EPAA work is, of course, the projects, the 10 that the commissioner referred to, and that is being led by Rafaela Corfi from DG JRC and Kirsty Reed from the European Federation for the Pharmaceutical Industry Associations. The Mirror Group has already been referred to, very important Mirror Group, and you'll hear more after my presentation from the current chair of the Mirror Group. This is a group of experts that help and guide EPAA activities and provide advice, and they come from different backgrounds such as academia, national 3R centers, animal welfare groups, And pleased to say that we also have a European Member of Parliament in the mirror group. And then last but not least, of course, the day-to-day running the business from the EPAA Secretariat. And here I would like to acknowledge the wonderful work that Irene Manu and Zvonimir Zvonar are doing day in and out to keep the EPAA running. Next slide, please. Pleased to say that all the work of EPAA is enabled here by what you see 37 companies, including one SME, and they range from cosmetic companies, detergent companies, agrochemical companies, pharmaceutical companies, so the whole range, which is very unique. And then 5 DGs from the European Commission, and 8 sectorial industry associations. So a unique partnership, I think, in existence for 15 years, enabled here by these groups. So a big thank you to all the contributors. Next slide, please. EPAA actions are science-based and derived from the action program, which we review every 5 years by the steering committee. The current action program dated from 2016 to 2020, and of course that ends by the end of this calendar year. The action program aims to address remaining challenges while taking into account the latest technological advances, regulatory developments, and progress in the 3 Rs. For the action program of 2021-2025, 6 challenges have been identified and will be addressed in line with the vision and mission. And I will not, for the sake of time, go into each of them individually, but I do want to call out that one of the focus areas for the upcoming 5-year period is the incorporation of state-of-the-art biology advancements and exposure considerations into safety assessments. I think Patrick already alluded to that in his speech. More on the next slide, please. So this is what we hope to address in the EPAA Partners Forum. The EPAA Partners Forum is a unique forum, actually, where we bring together industry regulators on one day, face-to-face, where we talk specific topics that are of interest to everybody, and basically come up with a way to kind of look at progress. Now, this year, of course, due to the circumstances we all know, we could not go ahead with the Partners Forum because the value of the Partners Forum is really in the face-to-face interactions. So we're going to move that to 2021. And the topic that we want to tackle is how weight of evidence assessments and next generation risk assessment approaches can be used to decide when repeated dose toxicity testing is needed to assess the safety of the ingredients. A very, very important topic, also in light of the new ambition from the EU Commission. Participants will, as always, be the industry, but also the Commission, ACFAM, and then the different agencies from the Commission. And these proceedings from the Partners Forum are always published in peer-reviewed publications so that everybody can have access to them. Next slide, please. That brings me to the second topic, which is the project activities. You will have seen the 2020 annual report. I think it's just out and available via our website. So I encourage everybody to have a look at the 2020 annual report. Next slide, please. And as I was telling, this is really the core of the EPAA activities, the 10 projects, and I think the Commissioner already referred to the 10 projects in his talk. And pleased to say that we've made, despite the challenging situation in 2020, we've made very good progress on these 10 projects. I do want to call out a couple of things. First of all, on the clostridial vaccines for veterinary use project, that there will be a virtual workshop early next year, January 25-26, which will be a joint EDQM, which is the European Directorate for the Quality of Medicines and Healthcare, with EPAA and with ACFAM, where they're going to discuss the findings and the experience of the in vitro assays. I also want to say a big thank you to the submitters of data for the acute toxicity project and for the optimal duration of non-clinical studies to assess safety of monoclonal antibodies project. A big thank you to those industries who submitted data. Without these data, of course, it would not be easy to move these projects forward. So thank you for that. I also want to basically call out a little bit on the projects 9 and 10. 9 is the new ideas for systemic toxicity. This is a follow-up from the Blue Sky workshop that we did last year, I think, around this time last year. So there will be continuation of this, more to come on that. And then on the skin sensitization, non-animal strategies, I think that's in the next slide. I have a little bit more detail on that. So if I could, thank you. So this we do through what we call users forum. How do we apply these non-animal strategies that are now available in practice to assess real case studies of skin sensitization, to do the assessment basically without any animal testing? I think we've had 2 user forum already via webinar where companies have exchanged data. I think there's a 3rd one being planned. So again, a big thank you to the companies who have shared data on this and have made the assessments available. I think the value in this is really in the discussion between industry, between the regulators, on how we're applying these non-animal methods in practice. Next slide, please. Then communication and dissemination of our activities, a very important aspect of our work. Next slide, please. At the occasion of our 15 years anniversary, we have published a 15 years achievements brochure that is available online. You may have seen it. In that brochure, we present the examples of our projects, of our areas of work. You will also see some information on the prizes and the grants. This helps the young generation working on the 3 Rs, which is very important. We list examples of training and dissemination activities, and again, leading through collaboration and networking. And I think the number of workshops, again, the Commissioner already referred to it, 50 workshops since 2006, and a total of 34 publications of the EPAA work. Next slide, please. This is, of course, today, right, with our annual conference, very important, 15 years celebration. We also had a workshop recently between ESOTOC, CONCAWE, and EPAA that talked about the scientific feasibility of exposure-based adaptations in the regulatory setting. That was October this year. I already referred to the EDQM, EPAA, JRC, ACFAM workshop in January on the vaccines. And then the Partners Forum, which was originally scheduled for yesterday, actually, but we're going to postpone that. We do not have a date yet. We're looking into that. As I said, the beauty of the Partners Forum is to do it face-to-face, but the topic we had already agreed upon, which is exposure considerations in human safety assessment. Next slide, please. There's also some activities that we've had in 2020, all virtual activities. There was a Cosmetics Europe workshop on science and research in February, where Irene presented. There was a conference of Cruelty-Free Europe, where the Commission co-chair Frans Lampelmeijer presented. And then we already had, as I already referred to, the ESOTOC EPAA CONCAWE workshop. Next slide, please. Then 5 publications in 2020. So you can see that there's been quite a bit of activity in 2020 on the publication side. So we're actually, stepping up, I would say, on publications. I have to say, Judy referred to this. We are making these publications available in open access, right? So everybody that wants to see the publications can see the publications for free. We think that that's very important. Next slide, please. The last one here is the one from the Blue Sky workshop. I think that Patrick also had in his presentation. Next slide, please. And then the promotion of the 3 R's. We do have today, more on that today, the science prize of €10,000 that EPAA makes available. The student grants that we had originally slated for this year will be postponed till next year. Thanks to Zvonimir, we're also very active on social media. We have quite a number of followers on Twitter for the topic that we're in. So, and then of course Brian Maguire supports us through the Euractiv media campaign that we do. Next slide, please. A little bit of an outlook on what's ahead, and hopefully we'll have. The virus will be less impacting our lives. We need to be careful. So I want to talk a little bit about the action program, the users forum, and then the World Congress on Alternatives, which also had to be postponed for a year. So next slide, please. As I said, the action program, we have tailored that a little bit towards the reality. I think the most important additional point that we've brought in is use of state-of-the-art biology and exposure considerations in decisions whether we need repeated dose toxicity to address safety. That's going to be the big topic for us for the future, also in light of the chemical strategy for sustainability that the Commissioner referred to. The users forum will definitely continue. I think this is a very successful start in 2020 with case studies and more to come on that. We will have EPA prizes in 2021 and the students grants. And next slide, I think, has the contribution to the World Congress in Maastricht in August 2021. We are a bronze sponsor and we will contribute to the World Conference with a sponsored scientific session. We will have a adjacent training on the new approach methodologies for skin sensitization. There will be a booth and we will have oral and poster presentations from the work of the EPAA projects. And that takes me to the last slide, I think. If you go to the next. Yes. And that's, let me end with a plea from my side to continue to work together in this unique partnership. And I think really truly believe this is a unique partnership. And I wanted to extend a very special thanks to my colleague, Commission Co-Chair Frans Lampelmeijer. Both Frans and I started in January 2019, and I've very appreciated the very open relationship with him. I also wanted to thank the steering committee members. Special thanks also to the Mirror Group members, the project teams and platform members, the EPAA member companies, and EPAA Secretariat, Diane and Sophie from the EU Commission. And thanks you all for listening. Over to you, Brian.
Rob, thank you. It's been a busy year despite all the limitations that COVID brought with it. So congratulations on the hard work and the advancement and everything that's been achieved this year. And just to pick up on your social media remarks there as well for LinkedIn and Twitter in particular, we have the hashtags for today, hashtag 3RS and hashtag EPAA15. If you go to the EPAA's Twitter page as well, you'll find some tweets with those links there. Please send your comments. We'll try and read some of those out later on in the program as well. So thank you for that, Rob. And let's go to Marina Pereira. She's the Regulatory and Science Advisor at the Humane Society International, and she's going to give us the Mirror Group perspective. Marina, good to see you.
Good to see you as well, and good to be here with everyone today. So thank you so much. Today I'm here to provide you, as mentioned, the Mirror Group perspective. that some speakers already talked about and gave a brief description. I am the chairperson of the Mirror Group, and hopefully this will give you a little bit of a snapshot of our perspective today. So next slide, please. First important message is that the Mirror Group would like to congratulate the EPAA on 15 years and cheers to many more years to come. Next slide. So what is the Mirror Group? The Mirror Group consists of representatives of civil society, reflects the views of academia, animal research organizations, animal welfare organizations, patient groups, and 3R centers. Members act on a personal capacity, and their input is based on their expertise. The Mirror Group acts as a consultation forum in an advisory capacity to the steering committee for the implementation of the action program and EPAA's projects. It adds a broader societal perspective to EPAA's work and holds quarterly meetings with the steering committee. Next slide, please. As for the composition of the Mirror Group, we currently have 10 members, as you can see, there are lots of different backgrounds from national 3R centers, animal welfare, animal research, academia, and we also have the pleasure to have with us a member of the European Parliament. I do believe that the plurality of the Mirror Group is its major strength, with the members' views, perspectives, and backgrounds providing scrutiny and input to the work. Next slide, please. So some key initiatives of the new Mirror Group that is currently on its new mandate. So we have the election of a chairperson for the first time, which is me. And we are holding regular online meetings between ourselves to discuss many topics from the EPAA's work and also current topics that we think are relevant. We are coming up with a proposal of own topics for consideration and ad hoc recommendations. We are also asking attention to widening the field of interest of the 3Rs from regulatory toxicology to fundamental and applied research and to disease models. We're also asking attention for appropriate funding for solving the more complex issues that we face nowadays in regulatory science, and also for a transition strategy by the Commission to non-animal science, very important one. We are also asking attention for consistency in the EPAA representation per company and in the EPAA initiatives. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, we all are aware of Directive 2010/63 on the protection of animals used for scientific purposes, and I would like to highlight some key concepts that are enshrouded in the directive. So on the preamble, we have that animal welfare is a value of the Union. It also states that animals have an intrinsic value which must be respected. There are ethical concerns of the general public, and animals should always be treated as sentient creatures. As for regulatory testing, it is necessary to increase the use of alternative approaches and to eliminate unnecessary duplication of regulatory testing. Very importantly as well is the Article 4 and the principle of 3Rs, replacement, reduction, and refinement. That states that wherever possible, a scientifically satisfactory method or testing strategy not entailing the use of live animals shall be used. Next slide, please. It is very useful to keep in mind the animal use, and for this, we would like to have a look at the report from the Commission on the statistics on the use of animals for scientific purposes in the member states of the European Union in the 2015 to 2017 period. So maybe the image is a little bit small for you to see everything, but we would like to highlight that these stats show that the majority of animal use lies in research, supporting our call to widen the field of interest for the 3Rs, from regulatory toxicology to fundamental and applied research, where most animals are used. These statistics also highlight the areas where more investment is needed, such as batch potency and other efficacy testing, reproductive toxicity, repeated dose, for more impact on the welfare of animals, and that there is a growing need for human biology-based alternative approaches. Next slide, please. On resource and funding allocation, which as was highlighted before, it's a very important topic if we really want to move the science forward. So the EU funding on research and alternatives to animal testing in the period of 2007 to 11 was of 238 million. And this was focused on simpler endpoints that were in principle easier to solve. This also means that significant ring fencing of funding is needed to develop and validate new alternative methods and approaches for the more complex endpoints to achieve the ultimate goal of replacement. If we have a look at the Horizon Europe and the current budget for the 2021-2027 period, we see that it's 100 billion euros, which is very ambitious, out of which 25.8 billion are allocated to science. So again, significant ring fencing and funding for new approach methodologies under the science budget is needed to achieve significant and impactful change. If we really want to move the science forward, significant investment is needed. Next slide, please. So just to have a brief look at the current landscape and the challenges ahead. And I would like to highlight that this is a very, very brief snapshot because it's very challenging and there's a lot happening out there these days. But we would like to highlight the EU Green Deal and the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, which needs to drive scientific innovation in new approach methodologies towards a toxic-free environment without an increase in animal testing. As for the cosmetics regulation, there is a critical need to ensure the integrity of the European testing ban for cosmetics remains strong. And we are keeping in mind recent decisions of the Board of Appeal of ECHA that for the first time was applied, and ECHA obliged companies to perform long-term animal tests for 2 UV filters that are only used in cosmetics. So despite the ban, we are still faced with a situation where animal testing is being demanded for cosmetic ingredients. There needs to be a proactive development and acceptance of non-animal solutions to address worker protection and other regulatory needs under REACH. On the very important topic of endocrine disruptors, there is a need to promote the development of new methods to assess endocrine disruptors for better protection of human health and the environment. There is a need to elucidate endocrine adverse outcome pathways to support application of mechanistic data to predict apical adverse outcomes. This is very critical if you really want to tackle this issue. On the Directive 2010-63, there is a need for a strategic plan with metrics to assess progress that effectively delivers on the objectives of the 3 Rs and the ultimate goal of replacement. We would also like to highlight work being done at the European Parliament with the Animals in Science Working Group, working to transition to non-animal science. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the EPAA's work had already a significant impact on the transition of the animal testing paradigm to non-animal testing and approaches. The Mirror Group will help to continue the good work and will be even more ambitious to reach the ultimate goals. EPAA is in a unique position to promote synergies and connect all stakeholders of the different fields, being regulators, users, developers, to better apply the 3 Rs in research and testing. Next slide, please. So this is the message that we would like to convey. This is truly the perspective of all the Mirror Group members, and we would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks for an excellent overview. And we're hopefully you'll be able to stay online with us for the prize giving, which comes up next. So I'm going to hand over to Franz Zampermeyer for a few minutes, and Franz is going to take us through the 3 Rs science prize giving. Franz.
Thank you, Brian, and hello, everybody. So I'm Franz Zampermeyer, the Commission co-chair of the EPAA, for those who don't know me, and I have now the honor and the pleasure to announce the winner of the EPAA Science Prize. I do this on behalf of the 2 co-chairs of Frau Broggeband and myself. Every 2 years, the EPAA since 2010 awards a young scientist for an outstanding contribution to the 3 Rs with a real impact. And the selection committee was, as usual, composed of members of the steering committee from the industry and from the European Commission. And also of members of the Mirror Group. And this year they had quite a difficult task because we had 12 very, very interesting applications, but they managed to find a clear winner, and I'm really, really happy and honored to announce Viviana Meraviglia, from the Leiden University Medical Center as the winner of the 2020 EPAA Science Prize. She is awarded actually for her outstanding innovative research on human-induced pluripotent stem cells, and she uses these human-induced pluripotent stem cells as a novel platform to study in vitro cardiac diseases, cardiotoxicity, and drug efficacy relevant to humans. Congratulations, Dr. Meraviglia. You scored a marvelous 203.5 points out of 240 possible points. So now I can hand over to you. Yeah, it's on the screen as well. This nice prize. I mean, it's only a sheet of paper, but in actual fact, there is
Thank you very much.
Sum of money behind it. Dr. Meraviglia will now give us some insights in her work, and congratulations again. All the best, and you have the floor.
Thank you. And good afternoon to everybody. It's a real pleasure to me to be here, and it's really an honor to get this prize. And I really would like to thank the committee and the organizer of this conference to giving me the opportunity to present my work on human mini hearts from stem cells to study cardiac disease, cardiotoxicity, and to reduce the animal experiments. So the heart is a complex organ with a highly organized three-dimensional structure with an integrated network composed of multiple cell types. So the cardiomyocytes are the cardiac muscle cells, which allows the contraction and the function of the organ. Among non-cardiomyocytes, the two main cell populations are the cells from blood vessels and called endothelial cells and supporting cells called cardiac fibroblasts. So the heart is a major organ at risk in drug safety testing. And the cardiotoxicity is actually a main reason for drug failure. So a lot of drugs cannot enter the market, so fail to reach the market, and some drugs are withdrawn after their approval because of the development of severe adverse cardiac effect, like the development of cardiac arrhythmia or heart failures, for example, for prolonged drug use for chronic conditions, or, for example, anti-cancer therapy. So for these reasons, it's really important in biomedical research to have reliable cardiac models to study this. So, but what are the sources of cardiac cells that can be used in biomedical research? An example are the animal models. So right now, the European regulatory authorities require the test of the clinical test of drugs on two animal models. So smaller animals like mice or rats, and larger animals like rabbits or dogs. However, the physiology, the cardiac physiology in animals differs from humans. And also the animals are not able to capture the human genetic traits. So for these reasons, the human primary cardiomyocytes can be a better alternative. But it's really difficult to be able to obtain these cells because it requires surgical and invasive procedures, which is a cardiac biopsies. So for this reason, the possibility to obtain cardiomyocytes from human stem cells has been a revolution in the field of biomedical research. But what are these human stem cells and how can we derive cardiomyocytes from them? So let's imagine to take and to remove a small piece of skin or to take cells from blood samples or urine samples. We can grow these cells in a petri dish in the lab, and we can reprogram these cells in order to obtain in vitro cells which are similar to the embryos. So these cells are pluripotent stem cells because they are able to become and to differentiate in any cell type of the human body. So these cells that we are able to create in vitro are called induced pluripotent stem cells. And like the human embryonic stem cells are then able to become any cell types of the body. So in my case, so in my study, just pushing these cells with a specific cocktails of molecules, we were able to obtain cardiomyocytes from induced pluripotent stem cells in order then to study cardiac disease and to test drugs and their cardiotoxic effect. Of course, this is a really huge advantage because that means that we have unlimited sources of cardiomyocytes that share the same DNA of the patients from which they are derived. However, the iPS cardiomyocytes have some limitations. One is the immaturity. So the cells are more similar to the cardiomyocytes in the embryos than the adult. Then, of course, the cells in a petri dish are not feeling like home. So they miss the three-dimensional environment and the communication with the other cell types. So to overcome all these limitations, during the past few years, I have the unique opportunity to work on the development of these innovative multicellular three-dimensional mini hearts entirely derived from stem cells. So these mini hearts are composed of the three main cardiac populations, so cardiomyocytes, endothelial cells, and cardiac fibroblasts in a precise and defined ratio. And all these cells are aggregated in these 5,000 cell aggregates in a very simple and cost-effective method. And using this model, we were able to demonstrate an increase in the maturation of the cardiomyocyte thanks to the crosstalk among the three cells included in the model. And we also use this system to test complex adult cardiac disease. And we also demonstrate the utility of our model to test drugs and their cardiotoxic effect. So this is an example of how 3D mini heart looks like. So in red, you can see the endothelial cells, which are able to organize themselves like a vessel-like structure. So exactly how it happens in the heart. And in green, you can see the cardiomyocytes, so the muscle cells responsible for the contraction. But how can we define the maturation of a cardiomyocyte? So the structure is really important. So here, there's an example of the shape of an adult cardiomyocyte, so with this elongated morphology, and the proteins responsible for the contraction that are organized in this typical bending pattern. Immature phenotype has a completely different shape, and also the organization of this protein is not so organized. And what we observed is that in our system, in our 3D mini hearts, we can actually observe the same organized pattern observed in the adult cells. Of course, for cardiomyocyte, it's also really important increase in the functional maturation. And that means electrical properties similar to the adult cardiomyocytes. And this is an example of the electrical profile of an adult cells compared to the immature cardiomyocytes. And what we observed in our system is actually that the cells that we obtain have an electrical profile very similar to the adult. So once we demonstrate that we are able to increase the maturation, then we started to test our system to study cardiac disease. And we used as an example a cardiac genetic disease called arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. This is a disease that is developed during the adult life, and it's caused by mutation of the DNA in these patients. This disease is characterized by structural changes like the deposition of fat in the heart. And as indicated by the name, of course, a feature of this disease is the development of severe ventricular arrhythmia, as you can see here in this example of an ECG from an ACM heart. So to study this disease, we create two different groups of our 3D mini hearts, keeping the cardiomyocyte and endothelial cells from a healthy individual. And we only change the cardiac fibroblast component from an healthy individual or derived from a patient with the ACM, so with the pathology. And what we observed is that only including mutated cardiac fibroblasts, we were able to reproduce an arrhythmic behavior in our in vitro model similar to what we observed in the patients. So that means that this system is not only able to recapitulate and to study adult cardiac disease, but also more complex disease where not only the cardiomyocyte, but also other cellular components like the cardiac fibroblasts are actually relevant to better understand the pathology and the pathogenesis of the disease. Then we used our models for drug testing and specifically for cardiotoxicity study of anti-cancer drug like doxorubicin. This is a very important anti-drug used for the cancer therapy, but unfortunately it is well known also the cardiotoxic effect of these drugs on the heart of the patients. So we collaborate with some chemists at LUMC, and these collaborators developed some variants of doxorubicin to maintain the ability to kill the tumor cells, but reducing the cardiotoxic effect. So we tested these molecules on our 3D mini hearts, and what we observed is that actually doxorubicin had a negatively affected our system, where the contraction is almost suppressed, while the variant of doxorubicin didn't affect the function and the contraction of our model and is comparable to the untreated mini hearts. So this is really important because that means that our model can capture the difference between the two drugs, so the toxic doxorubicin and the safe variants, and we observe these only after 21 days of experiment. But most importantly, we obtain in our in vitro system the same results that have been obtained after 3 months experiment in an in vivo model, so in mice. So in conclusion, our system is able to increase the maturation of cardiomyocytes comparable to the adult heart. And this is really important to use the system to study multicellular adult cardiac disease, but more importantly, to use the system for drugs testing and cardiotoxicity tests. So that means that our system, so we proved that our system can actually be used for cardiotoxicity study and obtaining similar results of mice. So that means that we think that our system show a great potential in this field, so to be able to replace one of the 2 animal models which are now required for preclinical tests of drugs. So of course, that means that in the future, so an optimization and implementation of these systems can actually be used for the reduction in the use of animals all over Europe. So I really hope that with my presentation, I convinced you that these systems might be a human-based in vitro alternative to animal experiments for drug safety and cardiotoxicity. I would like to thank all my colleagues at the Anatomy and Embryology Department at LUMC, and especially my supervisors, Milena Bellin and Christine Mammery, and the colleagues that closely worked with me on the project, Valeria Orlova, Giulia Campostrini, and Elisa Giacomelli, and all the other collaborators, both at LUMC and our external collaborators in Italy. And thank you all for your attention.
Viviana, congratulations, and very well done. Excellent presentation also. So glad you were able to join us today with this. And Franz, also thank you. Thank you. And to Franz also, thanks for leading there. And let's move on to our next session, which is on the alternative approaches, drivers and visions. We have 4 10-minute presentations. These, I'm sure you can grab a coffee and sit back for this. So our first presentation today, we're delighted to have Christian Bussoy with us. He is a member of the European Parliament and also chair of the ITRE committee, it's the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. And he's going to speak about policy perspectives from the European Parliament. Christian, good to see you today. How are you?
Hello, thank you very much for having me, and congratulations for this excellent event. I understand that I just have to say a few words just at the beginning, and then, well, it will be together in a panel. I'm very honored to participate for the first time at the EPAA's annual conference. This year we celebrate 15 years of existence as a unique cross-sector collaboration between industry and the European Commission, and sharing of knowledge, continuous dialogue between regulators, regulated policymakers, academics, and civil society. As it is stated in the achievements brochure published to celebrate the 5th anniversary of this initiative, this is a very effective partnership and is adding value to the development and acceptance of alternative methods to animal testing. EPAA is indeed an ideal cross-sector forum where active participation of experts from industry, academia, regulators, and NGOs work together with the Commission to continue ensuring the safety of consumers and patients with less or no animal testing. On this basis, you worked very successfully for 15 years, and this also has grown and expanded. Recently, we have witnessed the publication of the new chemical strategy for sustainability in the frame of the Green Deal, which is a positive development for Europe. However, I am concerned by the lack of different reference and clear goals to accelerate the phasing out of animal testing and the use of new approach methodologies. But we will discuss a little bit more on this a little bit later. My role with my colleagues in the European Parliament is to help stimulating and incentivizing the work done through initiatives as EPA. As chair of Industry, Research and Energy Committee, and also as a member in ENVI Committee, for you for health, but also involved in many other initiatives, I believe that we should contribute together to set clear goals and milestones for a complete phasing out of animal testing, which should be one of our endeavors. I have seen one of the priorities in the new EPA action plan, EPAA action plan 2021-2025, is to facilitate the acceptance of additional sources of evidence and new approach methodologies in the regulatory framework. Once again, this can be done through the sharing of industry experience and early interaction with the regulators and policymakers about their needs and expectations. The EPAA structure offers an ideal forum for such scientific interactions. With this, I would like to congratulate all who had the vision to launch this wonderful project 15 years ago. They have demonstrated that they were right. Let the future going beyond the actual achievements. Be assured that you'll always get the support of members of European Parliament and my support in particular in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you'll join us again later for the panel as well. So we look forward to speaking with you then. And let's go on to Adrian Smith. Adrian, if you're with us. And
Yes,
Adrian Smith is from NORECOPA and is a National 3R Center perspective. He's going to present. Adrian, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me just as clearly.
The floor's all yours.
Thank you very much. All I can see is my own screen, so please let me know if you have problems either with the picture or the sound. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to congratulate you with your 15th anniversary. I'm going to give a few views about the way the national 3R centres, particularly in Europe, have looked at alternatives. I have quite a lot of slides and only 10 minutes, so you can download all my slides from this simple address, norecopa.no/EPAA. NORECOPA's name itself, we are the national consensus platform in Norway for the 3Rs, tells us something about developments in Europe, which I'll come quickly to in a minute. We aim to be a source of global 3R resources, so we present on our website a lot more than what's going on in Norway itself. NORECOPA gets its name from EPAA, which was a European consensus platform for alternatives established at the end of the 1990s and the early 2000s. And what EPAA still exists, and it supports the establishment of national consensus platforms where all 4 stakeholders are equally represented in the governing body. And this is an idea I really like, that it promotes organizations where representatives both of government, the regulators, research, industry and animal welfare are all represented, aiming for consensus between these stakeholders. Today there are not so many members of EPAA, but we have a lot more 3R centres that have grown up throughout Europe, and not all these have all the 4 stakeholders in their governing bodies, but they're all doing a terrific job to promote the 3Rs. And this is also encouraged by the fact that the whole of Europe now is covered by laboratory animal science associations, which are working towards the same aim. We have now a European network of 3R centres established in 2018. And many of these centres have money for 3R research, as we heard from Judy about the British Centre. NORECOPA hosts the website of a network of these centres, and we have an interactive map at the address on the screen where you can click and get more information about each of the over 30 centres that we have at this precise moment, and the number is growing all the time. This work has been stimulated in many ways by the meetings in Linz, organised by OSAT, and the President, Winfried Neuhaus, organised a meeting to get these centres networking together at the 2018 meeting. This has also been encouraged by Horst Spielmann, Monika Schäfer-Korting, and others from the Berlin 3R centres, and we had a meeting as well in Berlin in March 2019, where the European 3R centre network was really got off the ground. And Winfried has just published a letter in Altex delivering a consensus statement which the 3R centres have signed, showing that we embrace all the 3Rs, and we consider it important to focus on non-animal methods. So we are promoting them equally as well as replacement methods. We're encouraging dissemination within the network and involving all members of the research community. And the statements in this consensus letter are well aligned with the 6 challenges which are described in the EPAA's action program for 2021 to 2025. We are in the process of preparing an application for a cost action. The working title is 3Rs for Better Science. And this is our contribution towards the efforts to meet the reproducibility crisis which Judy described earlier. And we intend to form working groups focusing on these topics: dissemination, quality, translatability of science, implementation and education, with a strong ethical input into each of these areas. We hope that this will close some of the gaps between current EU projects and ensure that basic research is also covered, because very many of the European 3R centres are more focused towards basic research than testing. Julie mentioned the World Congresses on Alternatives, which have been really important. These were the European ones, and at the 1999 meeting in Bologna, there was a workshop about national platforms, which was instrumental in initiating EPAA. ECFAM has also been a great help. They had a meeting in 1999 between 3 pioneer members of EPAA, and they followed that up by 2 networking meetings in 2015 and 2016, where we got around the table and got to know each other and discuss future collaboration. And as you've heard, the 2021 Maastricht meeting will also be important to further this work. Just a few words about NORICOPA to give you some idea of how these centres can work. We've invested a lot of time and money in producing a large website of global 3R resources covering all aspects of animal research. And we are also very concerned about the reproducibility crisis. In collaboration with British colleagues, our emphasis has been more on early planning for valid animal research, producing valid data with good animal welfare, rather than the reporting guidelines, which Judy mentioned. Our view is that a burnt cake is still a burnt cake, however well you describe it. If you're going to improve the quality of the cake, you need to go back to the kitchen and change the ingredients or the baking conditions. So one of the things that we've done in collaboration, as I said, with British scientists, is produce the PREPARE guidelines for planning animal experiments, which have 15 topics we believe all scientists should be thinking about from day one when planning experiments, with a heavy focus on the 3Rs. And these have been translated so far into 23 languages. And we have a dedicated website for the PREPARE guidelines, where we're adding more information all the time as new global resources, scientific papers, working group reports, etc. appear, which can help scientists to learn more about the topics on this planning checklist. And I'd like to wind up by showing you quickly 3 examples of collaboration work within the European 3R centres. This is excuse me, a compilation of severity classifications across Europe produced by German, Greek and British scientists. As you probably know, the EU directive now requires that we categorize procedures on experimental animals into mild, moderate or severe, or non-threshold, below threshold, and there are a variety of classification systems for this available, and we have published this compilation of the different systems in Europe to make it easier for scientists to decide whether their procedures are mild, moderate or severe. We've also this year launched a refinement wiki, which is embedded in the NORICOPA website, so that scientists, technicians, all others working with experimental animals can quickly publish information which maybe is too small to warrant a full scientific paper, or maybe they don't have time to write such a paper. They can put it out on the web and help disseminate important advances within the 3Rs in that respect. This is my final example. This isn't a graph connected with COVID-19. It's one of the more positive consequences of the pandemic. It's an increase in the number of webinars that have become available this year thanks to the pandemic. We've seen over 100 webinars already within lab animal science and welfare in 2020. NORICOPA has for a long time now had a very comprehensive international meetings calendar, but so many of these webinars are now being recorded and published on the web that we've also now made a list of recorded webinars, which is a marvelous opportunity for workers within animal research and testing to update their knowledge by accessing some of these excellent seminars that are now available. So looking to the future, where are we going with this European network? As I say, it's fairly early days. Everybody has their own agenda. I see a tremendous possibility for collaboration. We've already had several meetings that we've co-organized with other centers, and the cost action that I mentioned will, I'm sure, be an extra stimulus to this work, as are the meetings that we have at the World Congresses and the Linz meetings in Austria. So I'd like to end by quoting the American philosopher, which I think describes the way we're working in Europe. We're a society showing unity in diversity. So thank you very much for listening. I'd like to thank all the sponsors of Noricopa's work, and remind you these slides are available at that address.
Adrian, thank you so much. I'm sure Joe Biden will find use for that quote at some point in the near future as well, President-elect. So let's go to Maurice Whelan, and he'll present now on the European perspective. I think there's some feedback there, Maurice. Can you maybe switch off the microphone for a moment? There we go. Okay, can you do sign language for your presentation, Maurice? Let's see if we can get that working in just a moment. Maurice Whelan, he's the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. It's going to be a problem. Maybe you want to put the headphones on if you have them close to you as well. Or else it's a tab that you need to close. Maybe the tech team can give some element of chat there. See, it's full static noise, so either headphones or it's a window which is open. Or just switch off your mics, maybe. There we go. See now?
How about that?
It's a little bit better. There's a lot of static on there. I'm not sure why.
It was working just before, so I'm not sure what
the problem is. Can I suggest that if Anna is ready, we move on to Anna and we can just test that for a second. Maybe just need to close the browser and reopen again. Anna, if you can let me know on the chat if you're okay to start now. Otherwise, I can sing for you. Maybe you want to start. Okay. I think I'm going to start now as well. Just give us one moment and we'll get Anna's ready to start. So thank you, Anna, and we'll get Maurice back on in just a moment. Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for stepping in. And Maurice will join us again after your presentation with all the audio problems as well. So let me just introduce Anna. Anna's at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. She's going to present on the global perspective. The floor is all yours, Anna.
Okay, so hopefully, yeah, there are the slides. Okay, so I was asked to give just a few 10 minutes, I'll watch the time, on the US EPA's efforts to reduce animal testing and the recent, primarily the recent directive by Administrator Andrew Wheeler to EPA staff to move towards eliminating the use of mammals in testing by 2035. So I'll assume everyone can hear me unless I hear otherwise. So if you can just advance the slides. All my contact information is on the slides, and these will be available. Hopefully there are plenty of links in here if you have questions, or you're please welcome to contact me. But I also want to congratulate EPAA on its 15-year anniversary. Actually, I am one of the co-chairs of the U.S. Interagency Coordinating Committee for the Validation of Alternative Methods, or what's often called the U.S. ICVAM, and we are this year celebrating our 20th anniversary. So lots of wonderful milestones in the area of animal reduction and in the new approach methods this year. So that's fantastic. So September of last year, a whopping 14 months ago, Administrator, US EPA's Administrator Andrew Wheeler did a pretty profound thing. He put out a directive to staff with several critical ideas in it. First, so remember the backdrop. Unlike in Europe, in the United States, and actually North America, we do not have any legislation mandating the move away from animals. We do under our TSCA legislation, Toxic Substance Control Act, have some legislation that encourages the use of new approach methods over the use of vertebrates, but it's not a requirement per se. So the directive by Administrator Wheeler is quite profound in the United States. So the directive, relatively short, is actually quite chock full of a lot of substance. So the goals in the memo are first to reduce requests for and funding of mammalian studies by 30% by 2025. So that's the first milestone. So when we think about requests for, so these would be data requests by the pesticide office for pesticide testing, testing done for toxic substances, but also funding. So U.S. research, U.S. EPA funded research to academic organizations, but also inside of the EPA, our own EPA funded researchers will be reducing their use of mammals. The big milestone in the directive is the elimination of mammalian test requests and funding by 2035. That beyond 2035, any requests or funding of mammalian studies has to be done with upon agreement with the administrator. So the idea here is to accomplish the goals through the development and application of new approach methods. As most of you know, that would encompass any technology, method, or combination thereof that avoids the use of animal testing. The directive primarily focuses on two portions of EPA, the first being the Office of Research and Development, and the second being the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. And that's where I work in the pollution, the Chemical Safety Office. And staff from the Office of Research and Development and Chemical Safety were tasked with forming an expert work group internally to develop a work plan. Next slide. So we did in a matter, so keep in mind that this directive has only been announced for 14 months. So in a matter of 14 months, you'll hopefully see the rapid pace that we've been taking. We did complete draft and release the work plan in June of 2020. And the link is there for anyone interested in seeing it. So what I'm going to do over the next 3 or 4 slides is basically go through the elements of that work plan. Next slide. The work plan has 5 major objectives for achieving the reduction goals while maintaining the agency's full protection of human health and the environment. We have both long-term and short-term strategies to obtain not only the interim 30% goal, but ultimately the elimination of mammalian testing. The work plan talks about deliverables and timelines. And what's important is that the work plan is really a snapshot in time, as all of you know this well and has been discussed in the previous presenters. In the area of NAMs and animal reduction, there's really a lightning speed pace where we've got going, which is fantastic. So we anticipate the work plan to be flexible and evolve as we make progress. Next slide. So we have 5 objectives. First, the first one is to evaluate the regulatory flexibility. We're going to develop some metrics. We're working on establishing scientific confidence, filling information gaps with NAMs, and engaging with stakeholders. So I've got, I think, 1 slide for each of those, and I'll go through them quickly. Next slide. So we are in the process of doing a thorough internal review of our federal statutes and associated regulations, policies, and guidances around the use of mammalian testing. And we're putting together a report on the findings of that review and in both areas of flexibility that we have in our regulations, but also areas of regulatory hindrance that may prevent obtaining some of these goals. Next slide. We are in the process of developing baselines and metrics for assessing progress. This is actually building on some successes that we've already had at ORD and Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. In fact, the office where I work in the pesticide office, we recently actually released our own brand new website on metrics. Unfortunately, the That link is not on the slide, but if you just Google EPA pesticides, animal reduction metrics, something like that, it'll pop right up. And you can see that we have been, for the last several years, doing a fairly accurate annual count of the number of animals that we're using and saving. And so that's something we're quite proud of. But these metrics we're going to continue to make new metrics, but our sister offices and the water office, the air, clean solid waste, etc., will be developing their own metrics in the next couple of years. And so we will start to routinely report on the website on metrics. Also, as an aside, last year, the U.S. General Accounting Office, or what's often called the GAO, which is an arm of the White House, put out a report basically recommending that ICVAM develop a metrics work group that in the area of metrics that the U.S. government, federal agencies are lagging behind in their area of metrics and animal counting. So this metrics work is also responsive not only to the administrator, but also to the request from the White House to develop better metrics. Next slide. One of the big areas that's already been discussed, and I would guess that Maurice will touch on this when he gets back, is the area of establishing confidence in NAMs. It's really absolutely necessary at this point that we reinvent how we think about validation and move away from the idea that everything needs a 3-ring trial. In fact, the 3-ring trial process is established under the OECD is not giving us NAMs that are fit for purpose in answering your regulatory questions. But what we have to do is build a new framework for scientific confidence in thinking about how NAMs are needed and how they fit this fit for purpose questions of both industry, academia, and regulators. So we're building assay systems that are actually answering our questions. And so we have a number of things that we're doing in this area. The first thing of that list that we're doing will be to engage the U.S. National Academy of Sciences on thinking about how using existing animal data provides a hindrance to understanding how to move away from them. Using the animal as the gold standard has really become a hindrance, in part because the animals rarely reproduce themselves, they're highly variable, and often not even human relevant. So we'll be engaging the NAS this year on this very important topic. Next slide. We are working not only with the Office of Research and Development as regulators, but we're also working with NAM developers, the National Institute of Health, NIEHS, NICEDM, and a number of other industry partners to actually develop NAMs to fill in the gaps that we're looking for. The US EPA Pesticide Office has a couple of really good case studies that we're working on that are good examples of that, actually, this year, we put out the world's first human health risk assessment using in vitro data as the point of departure for risk extrapolation. So that's for the first in the world. We're quite proud of that. We have some work that we're doing in the development in neurotoxicity space with EFSA, along with Office of Research and Development. And we also have some work that we're doing in the inhalation space, moving away from the rat to the 3-dimensional human assays. Next slide. And as you know, it's been really brought up in a couple of presentations this morning, and something that EPAA really excels at is this engagement and communication with stakeholders, bringing people from different points of view and different expertise together at the same table is really the only way we gain success. But one of the areas that we're really putting a lot of emphasis on is non-technical stakeholders, those worker protection groups and environmental groups who are concerned about this change from using the animal to the new methods, and really educating not only the public but also our internal managers, our internal staff on the importance of this. So we have been doing a lot of outreach, including things like this, but we've been doing webinars. We have a brand new website that we're going to continue to populate. And we're going to begin some training series, not only for our internal staff, but external stakeholders. Next slide. I think I'm done. Acknowledgement. So we do have a work group of people who have worked on the work plan. You may have heard we've, in the last couple of weeks, had our second annual NAMS conference, State of the Science. And so in 14 months, we actually pulled off 2 big conferences. We're really excited about the second one. We had about 1,000 people from all over the globe registered. Hundreds and hundreds of people called in. We had a very active chat box. It was really a huge success. But we couldn't do this not only with the work group, but with staff across EPA who are really excited about these changes. So with that, I'm finished, and hopefully Maurice will be ready.
Anna, thank you so much. Stay with us for the panel discussion in just a few minutes. Maurice, we've been testing his audio. As far as I understand, everything is back on track. Moment of truth, Maurice.
I hope so. Can you hear me
good,
now? Okay.
good. Excellent. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, nothing like a bit of a heart attack just before you're about to present. Thank you. I'm Maurice Whelan. I'm head of the Chemical Safety and Alternative Methods Unit at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. And I'm also head of the EU Reference Laboratory for Alternatives to Animal Testing. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and happy birthday, EPAA. Happy birthday to us. It's really terrific to be together to celebrate. And as much as we're looking forward to what lies ahead, I do think it's important to look back and celebrate our achievements, really to give us inspiration and motivation to push on. You know, EPAA is made up of organizations, but really it's sustained by the people behind those organizations. And we're all disappointed not to have the chance to get together and have a chat and catch up, but at least we can have this online event. Just a bit of a disclaimer, I'm giving one Commission perspective. I'm not giving the Commission perspective, so don't be misled by my title. Next slide, please. So as the Commissioner mentioned earlier, when we talk about vision and drivers, as we are in this session, then we need to look to the recently published Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. It's a very important element of President von der Leyen's Commission's Green Deal. If you haven't read it, please do so. But also published with the strategy, a progress report on dealing with mixtures, and also there's a staff working document on the fitness check of endocrine disrupting chemicals, which my own unit led actually on behalf of the Commission, working together with 15 other DGs and the Secretary General. So a major piece of work. You know, this strategy, as I've indicated on the slide there, really is opportunity and necessity to achieve the ambitious goals of the Green Deal, you know, first steps towards a zero pollution ambition. But, you know, the strategy also represents great opportunity for extensive use of alternative methods. And I'd go further today. I'd say that really the extensive use of alternatives will be an absolute necessity to achieve many of the key objectives in this strategy, and you can quote me on that. Next slide, please. Let me elaborate just a little bit. You know, the strategy states clearly in the white box there, promote innovative testing and risk assessment methods and the regulatory uptake, and particularly non-animal methods. So it's good it's there. Personally, I would have liked to seen it have more prominence, but you can't have everything. But let's look at some of the other objectives. First of all, you know, we want to ensure that most harmful chemicals are not contained in consumer products. So these are carcinogen, mutagen, and reproductive toxicants, but also endocrine disruptors, you know, immunotoxicants, neurotoxicants, chemicals that affect the respiratory system and also have effects on specific organs. So a lot there. And we're going to do this, you know, by improving our knowledge on chemical properties, by requiring more information on chemicals. And, you know, put all that together, that means that we're going to be wanting to assess more chemicals for more health effects, which will require more testing data and more testing. So we need NAMS to really address this. And at the same time, we want to do this by simplifying processes for assessment across sectors. So one substance, one assessment ambition. And also, you know, depend on internationally recognized standards and innovative assessment tools, for example, those coming out of OECD. So indeed, a very tall order. And I would say, again, impossible to achieve with current approaches that are solely based on conventional animal testing. So it's not a case of if we shift to alternatives, but how do we do it? And very importantly, how fast can we do it? Next slide, please. So look, where do we stand with alternatives on our modern safety assessment toolbox? Well, technologically speaking, it's really never been better. The variety, sophistication of alternative methods and models is really mind-blowing. You know, we've seen a big shift in recent years to induce pluripotent stem cells and 3D tissues. And Viviana did an amazing presentation there earlier. Complimenti auguri, Viviana, for your achievements. You know, we've seen organ on chip coming rapidly into view. You know, we can generate omics data in high throughput now, something we couldn't even imagine even a few years ago. We finally got a handle on biokinetics, you know, something that I used to call the Achilles heel of in vitro approaches. Computational methods are really coming to the fore. You know, I often say to my colleagues, look, why are we trying to measure it when we can compute it? We're making much better use of legacy data from animal studies using data science approaches. We've got access to real-life data from patients, biomonitoring. Amazing. And, you know, many of these advances have been driven forward in Europe by a number of major initiatives, CEFIC, LRI, the Cosmetics Europe Long-Range Science Strategy, the IMI, and of course, Horizon 2020 projects like EU Tox Risk, the Orion Cluster. And now we've got 3 new projects that are going to be funded by Horizon 2020 specifically for safety assessment to the tune of 60 million euro. And we're looking forward to collaborating with those. Next slide, please. So wonderful innovations, but another source of innovative evidence that we really should look to from a regulatory toxicology perspective are the models and methods being developed by the basic and applied research communities, you know, working in biology and other domains. And really, just as much as the tox world, you know, we've been moving away from black box testing towards mechanistically informed approaches. So too have these communities. So we really are seeing a wonderful convergence emerging that brings different life science fields together. And you know, at JRC, ECFAM, you know, we've been undertaking a series of major reviews and meta-analyses of non-animal models and methods available. We've published our review on respiratory disease models and more just recently one on breast cancer. So incredible innovation. The models and methods are really out there, ready to be exploited. So please take a look and share this knowledge. It's really on a silver plate and ready to be used. Next slide, please. So, you know, what might be holding us back? We've made progress, but how can we go faster? And, you know, here's just 3 issues that I've heard, you know, come up in some of the other speakers' talks too. And this is from my own perspective. The first is integration. You look, scientifically and technically, it's a real challenge. You know, we have a real amazing suite of tools in our toolbox, but what's the optimum combination? Some people are taking a data-driven approach, so generating huge amounts of data on lots of chemicals, lots of different methods, and, you know, using statistical methods to try to find optimal combinations. And of course, we have other approaches that are based more on our knowledge, mechanistic knowledge, informed by adverse outcome pathways and so on. So scientifically and technically, that's a challenge, but also it's a challenge at regulatory level. You know, at OECD, for example, we've developed the integrated approaches to testing and assessment, IATA framework. It includes defined approaches, but look at the difficulties that we're having getting regulatory acceptance of defined approaches for skin sensitization. You know, as Patrick mentioned before, and so on, it's Anna, one of the most developed areas where we have alternatives. But, you know, the defined approach that we're proposing as a guideline at OECD has both in vitro and in silico elements. And this is something we've never seen before. So our regulatory frameworks that, you know, are struggling, particularly when we talk about compatibility with mutual acceptance of data, good laboratory practice, and so on. Benchmarking is another issue, critically important in qualification and validation. But, you know, what are we benchmarking against? Is it correct that we still keep benchmarking against animal data? Is that relevant? Do we have it? What about human data? Again, do we have it? Is it enough? Is the quality good enough? Again, it's a major reason for major discussion for the defined approaches for skin sensitization is a whole continuing argument, I would say, on what reference data we should be using and the quality of that data and what constitutes quality of data. So a big question. And in the cases like developmental neurotoxicity, where we really don't have real life data on animals or on people, how then can we establish credibility? And can we rely more on what we know rather than what we think we can measure? And finally, there's this, what I call the information dilemma. Look, information requirements in most sectors were conceived on the basis of using conventional animal tests for satisfying those information requirements. So they're intrinsically biased. It's not surprising. But we know that the information generated with alternative methods is fundamentally different than the information generated with animal methods. So look, we need to come together as scientists, as regulatory scientists, as regulators, as risk managers, as policymakers, really to devise new information requirements that deliver the protection levels we seek, as set out in the chemical strategy, but that make optimal use of new approaches. Next slide, please. You know, Anna touched on this, and quite rightly so. You know, our conventional paradigm for getting regulatory acceptance has been, you know, essentially requiring high levels of standardization, very rigorous validation, to achieve really formal acceptance in the context of a test guideline or an internationally recognized standard. And of course, this is highly desirable. Let us not forget that. The reason why we have this paradigm is because we like standardization. We like guidelines. It facilitates international acceptance. It makes life easier both for regulators and the regulated community, industry. It makes life easier for lawyers and particularly facilitates global markets and trade. So we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to retain this ambition of having standardization. However, as indicated in this slide, and as Anna touched on quite correctly, you know, the vast majority of methods we see coming through now are not standard. Neither should they be standardized to the level that we're used to or that we might desire. We need to talk therefore much more about flexible approaches, flexible frameworks to establish credibility, to establish confidence, and ultimately to you know, promote belief in these methods. Next slide, please. So just coming to the end, you know, besides all the science and technology and policies and politics, we need to progress alternative methods. One of the biggest drivers will be the next generation of bright young minds. And our JRC Summer School, this is our third edition that will be running next May, hopefully, really where we're trying to bring the new generation of researchers, new generation of toxicologists, safety assessors, of regulators together, not only to learn about the new sciences, but very importantly to network between themselves, because in a blink of an eye, they'll be the decision makers of tomorrow, and they need to know each other. Final slide, please. Next slide. And I just want to draw attention to our ECFAM status report, full of plenty of juicy, short and concise descriptions of what's going on, not only in JRC, ECFAM, but also you know, lots of the collaboration projects that we have with you all. So just to conclude, final slide, please. Just want to say that the JRC and as ECFAM, we're very proud and active members of EPAA, and we genuinely look forward to the next 15 years of fruitful collaboration in what is truly a unique partnership. Thank you.
Maurice, that was excellent. Thank you. I aspire to your optimism of being in Italy for next May, if that's entirely possible. We're going to now bring on the panel discussion. Maurice is going to stay with us, and Christian Boussoy is going to rejoin us. Anna Lowe is going to rejoin us, and Patrick Michelin from Procter & Gamble is going to join us as well. Let's give everybody a moment just to, there we go. Patrick online, excellent. Everybody's with us. And we're going to invite the audience also to send questions for our panelists, and I'll take those a bit later on. There's instruction for you at the bottom of the screen, and Anna is going to be in the background. She'll shuffle some of those to me during the course of the conversation. So please send those to us now. You don't have to wait for the Q&A part, which we'll come to in about 15 minutes. And I want to kick off just with I was going to ask everybody to do 60 kickoff, but I'm going to scrap that because I think enough of what you would have said has been outlined already. So Patrick, I want to come back to you. You mentioned this lovely phrase, the third age of biology. And our discussion here is the alternative approaches and political initiatives, European Green Deal, sustainable chemical strategy. Is this the third green age of biology, and how do you see the Green Deal and sustainable chemical strategy fitting in the context of animal testing?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Brian. Actually, a lot of the response was given by the excellent presentation of Maurice, right? Really putting the challenge forward. If we want to assess more chemicals, we'll have to do it faster. We probably have to do it more cost effective. And ideally, we could also do it right that it's even more predictive for our ultimate goal, which is actually the protecting of the consumer, at least for a company like P&G. And they're based and doing this based on fundamental knowledge on human biology, which I think we will need to continue to innovate in and collaborate and raise partnerships is certainly the right way forward. That's also where P&G will look forward to collaborate with any partner to advance that purpose. I think it will fit the chemical strategy for sustainability nicely, as Maurice explained.
Thank you. Christian, does the European Parliament think that there's the right approach within the chemical strategy within the Green Deal in terms of alternative methods for testing? Is there enough in there? Should there be more?
Well, of course, what we are seeing until now is encouraging, and of course, this is very important that we have new approach methodologies. But as I said, there is a quite concern that in the proposed chemical strategy may result in a lot more animal testing and less commitment. You know that we are also in a global competition, and Europe looks a little bit behind the US, for instance, in the new approach methodologies. We have the most stringent regulatory requirements on chemical safety assessments around the world. But in order to embrace the progress made so far by the industry and academics using already new approach methodologies and further stimulate the progress and innovation in testing, we need to encourage European institutions and EPAA to move quickly away from outdating testing requirements and to accept ingredient safety assessments without animal data when these are based on sound science, greater human relevance, and hence a better rationale for protecting human health. I believe that in cooperation with EPAA and of course with industry, with academia, with all the researchers, we could reach not far from the moment that we are talking today, a complete phasing out of animal testing. And this is something that we are aiming, and there are a lot of colleagues in the European Parliament that would be very, very keen to work on it. Of course, without jeopardizing the need for science, for testing in general. So just use the alternative methods.
Thank you. Anna, from your perspective, sitting on the other side of the Atlantic, when you look at Europe, do you see a pathway for Europe, for the globe to move away from animal testing?
I think there's reasons to be optimistic worldwide, not just in North America, but also in South America. We're seeing a lot of progress in Brazil, for example. There's a lot, I think Maurice in 30 seconds provided the 10,000-foot view of the status of things. So we've never had this many models. We've never had this many approaches. There's fantastic opportunities. It's just a matter of taking them. We've got to find a way to get the OECD to move faster. There's just some fundamental challenges we have at the OECD worldwide that we've got to make some changes at the way the W&T process is working, the way the 3-ring trial process is working. All of that will help everyone speed up.
What's the roadblocking? What's the bottleneck for this progress, the speed of progress?
Even at the OECD, I think that the challenge is just the structure, that the W&T process is not set up to be fluid and flexible and to think about things in a really fit-for-purpose way. It's set up to focus on the 3-ring trials and how A compares to B. Well, if A and B are not the same, then what do you do? So, it's an apples and oranges comparison. We've got to rethink using the animal as the gold standard. because it doesn't reproduce itself most often. It's really, the animals are really variable, and they're often not giving us human relevant effects. So if we're building in vitro models in human tissues, building human models that are predictive, why do we then anchor to the animal that we know is not human predictive? It's a paradigm that we have to find a way to move away from. And it's one of the big challenges that we face in the next year or two.
Mark, you're such a strong advocate for the next generation. Is this bottleneck approach, particularly as Anna mentioned in the context of the OECD, is this a generational problem? Do we have to wait for the next generation, or do you see a way through this where the paradigm is reorganized in a way which is recognition of where we are today in terms of modern science?
Do you know what? When I was putting together that slide earlier, I was thinking, you know, when the EPA started, I was in my 30s, later 30s, but still in my, and now I'm in my early 50s, and I was actually thinking, could I think how I used to think back then, and you know, trying to, and look, I came to the conclusion that, of course, you know, it's a continuum, isn't it? You know, what I love about the summer school contexts and bringing these, you know, these aren't students, these aren't people with, you know, these are very accomplished young professionals who know an awful lot. And when we change the format of the summer school, not to be a kind of traditional school, but in fact be essentially a networking event, where it was about sharing each other's knowledge, then that's where we got the spark, the magic. So of course, the old school, like myself, dare I say, Patrick, you know, we've seen a few EPAA annual meetings, but you know, we've a lot to contribute, you know, in terms of experience and know-how, but equally that can be matched with not only the new knowledge that the next generation have in all these new sciences, but very importantly, it's much easier to reformulate the problem with a younger mindset. We keep getting, I feel, stuck in a rut that if we talk about replacement, you know, it turns into a can I replace a 90-day rodent study with alternative methods, and that's a dead end. What we need to do is reformulate the question in saying, can I offer the levels of protection to human health and the environment that I so desire as defined in my policy, while not, you know, doing it in an economically sensible and viable way. And, you know, that's not the same as saying, can I replace a 28-day rodent study with an organ on chip, you know? And so that's where I feel that the you know, the plasticity in the young brain really contributes to innovative ways of formulating the problem as opposed to just coming up with a new solution.
Yeah, if I can actually, sorry, Brian, if I can, I really like to build on what Maurice was saying, because, you know, as we recruit new scientists, toxicologists, very few of them actually have still experience with animal data, animal experiments. They come in with a fresh mind. They come in with a lot of skill sets around computational skills, right? So that we can really try to build virtual models of the human biology. Within P&G, as we recruit people, they challenge us. Why do you use this, if I can quote Maurice, these old technologies, while you have available for you all of these new array of tools? And they are actually a power of change within, not only within the society, but certainly also within industry. So I really can echo the observation that Maurice says from a practical point of view.
Very short also from me.
Go ahead.
You know that we are preparing for the digital age, and we need to include digitalization more and more in our lives, in our economics, in our research. We put a lot of emphasis on digitalization in the European Union. It's one of the two very strategic directions for the next decades, along with the Green Deal. And I believe also that digitalization, computing, digital models will also be the future of research. And this is something that we should prepare. And that's why it's good to promote even from now this.
Thank you. Anna, when you have to explain to people why they should redesign the model, what arguments work and what don't? Is it enough to say we have the data, we have quantum coming on the horizon as well for scientific modeling in a completely different way than we understand right now. What do you say to others when they say this is a bit risky?
So I can tell you what's working in the U.S. So in the U.S. we've had a lot of success in the last 2 years, I think, in 3 areas: skin sensitization, developmental neurotoxicity, and inhalation. And all 3 of those, the US EPA will have regulatory. We have a brand new, first in the world risk assessment with skin sensitization. We anticipate using the 3D human inhalation models in at least 1, if not a couple more risk assessments in the coming year to 2 years. And the D&T issues are forefront for a lot of pesticide chemicals that target the nervous system. That what we're finding actually when you talk to people, whether they're scientists or non-scientists, is when you explain that in those, and I think in all 3 cases, there's good science that tells us that the animal model is either not human relevant or is so variable that the data that we get from those studies is not very informative. And when you explain to people that if you understand the steps to the biology, even if you don't have the full built-up adverse outcome pathway, if you understand the basic steps in that biology leading from exposure to outcome, that we can take in vitro and silico approaches and put things in each of those steps that helps us predict the human outcome. And so let's say in the developmental neurotoxicity case that we've been working with EFSA and our Office of Research and Development with, that we had a very successful external peer review, what we call federal advisory committees, about 2 months ago, talking about why the rat developmental neurotoxicity guideline is not answering our regulatory questions, is not answering our scientific questions, but we have all these new in vitro approaches that do. They tell us how neurons are communicating with each other, which we can't do in a rat. They tell us how the neurons are growing, how they're dying, how they're dying on schedule, and we can't do that in a rat. Really, what you can do in a rat is stick it in watch it swim for a little bit or count its motor activity, but it's hard to know how human relevant that is. But you can easily imagine thinking about how neurons connect with each other, how that's human relevant. Even if you can't connect it to IQ or you can't connect it to neural learning and behavior, you intuitively know that if the neurons aren't communicating, there's something going wrong. And that kind of message, at least in the United States, has been very effective. And so what we're finding that areas where the animals are not good models has been where we've been really effective. And if we can work in that space and build confidence, then we can then to work in other spaces where people believe the animal is relevant. That's largely our approach.
Patrick, thank you, Anna. Just on the same approach, you're dealing with commercial dimensions of this. You have to account to stockholders as well as to regulators and consumers who may rise and fall with optimism depending on how you present it. Is the argument that we have to, a good science argument, is this what needs to be discussed? It's not about throwing everything away, changing everything. It's but about explaining this is good science. Today, good science is different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. How do you approach this in terms of explaining to regulators and consumers that the paradigm has to shift?
Communication is a very difficult aspect of all of this, Brian and colleagues. Right? For the consumer, it needs to be very straightforward. It needs to be credible. It needs to be easily to be explained. And as you just heard, what we talk is not very easy to be explained. Right? There's quite some nuance in the learning that we have. So I think that's a challenge. How can you explain, right, a new paradigm and still at the same time assure consumer safety? That's something that we, as a company, and I would assume many companies struggle with. Because consumers have actually more and more, I think, a preference, actually sometimes a very strong preference for products that are not being tested on animals. But at the same time, you need to reassure the safety, and you need to explain, in a transparent way, how you have gone about this. So that provides quite a challenge to us. With the regulators, we are often bound to the regulatory requirement tests. We often take a parallel path where we could, provide the perspective, with a new alternative approaches, where we provide the regulators with a case study in detail using the next generation risk assessment approach, and really engage in a dialogue. Because what I feel is that we are learning all in this together. We all have what I would call a job to be done, which is very common, at least in the field that I'm working in, which is to be protective of the consumer. The way we approach it, the requirements that we need to get that job done still differ. But I would assume engaging, or at least our experience is that if you engage in a very transparent or dialogue, what is the problem you really try to solve? Where is your lack of confidence? And then you can have the dialogue and the partnership. Typically, I think we can make progress. But that's the way we have approached different things. So simple way need to find to communicate to consumers, because it's increasingly important for a larger consumer base. And on the opposite, a very detailed technical scientific discussion and engagement with the regulators. It's a dual strategy, I would say.
Okay, and just something Julie mentioned earlier as well, she spoke about the predetermined demand. You don't need to move the whole market forward in one go with Procter & Gamble, do you? You can play to those consumers, like you said, who have already identified a particular preference for non-animal testing. So you have a predetermined demand there for a certain cohort of products.
Yeah, but I would say that the goal is to be protective of the consumer, right? With the highest certainty that we can provide on our assessments. And if that is increasingly based on fundamental knowledge on human biology, using all of the tools that some of the colleagues here portrayed, that's what we should do.
Okay.
Right? That's the goal.
And the roadmap to that, Maurice, how often can the European Union adjust its direction? Do we have to wait 5 years? Do we have to wait 10 years? Do we have to wait until the next Green Deal revision comes out? What's the strategy for shifting this paradigm and adjusting to these new narratives?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that in the EU, honestly, I don't see any policy or legislative barriers per se. I mean, we have our directive in place. We have provisions then across sectorial legislation, particularly in REACH, for example, cosmetics, etc., that already have a strong provision for the use of non-animal methods when it's possible to do so. So I honestly don't see any fundamental issues. Building on Patrick's points, though, I mentioned the word belief in my presentation, and it's funny. Maybe as a scientist, I often would not use words like that. We don't tend to talk about proof in science, but we don't tend to talk. But honestly, I do think it's got to a point where we need to seriously look at who believes and who doesn't believe, and how do we have more believers. And what that means is that we need to look really more holistically at the business case, at the value proposition, as our American colleagues would often put it, and stop talking about it in terms of more narrow scientific terms, like this will allow us to replace that animal test, or you make it a toxicological prediction problem, which scientists love doing, of course. The issue is we need to bring in senior risk managers, both in industry and in regulatory authorities and in the Commission, who ultimately are calling the shots, and get a bigger, better understanding there about the value proposition. And yes, of course, we want to move away from animal testing. But as I tried to explain very quickly in the presentation of the chemical strategy, there are an awful lot of key objectives in there, which, look at the objective for, safety by design and sustainability. I mean, how are companies going to be able to decide between a more hazardous or less hazardous chemical if they have to do a 2-year rodent bioassay to check if it may be a carcinogen? You know what I mean? It's not. We need to join the dots, and we need to have that conversation in a broader community than just the scientific community. So that would be, my desire to move things forward. So I don't see any real, as I say, explicit impediment legally or policy-wise, but it's about getting down and getting the right people together.
Thank you. We have loads of questions, so I'm going to start ticking through these now. And you don't have to answer them all. We'll try and direct them according to who wants them. So I'll ask you, if your name isn't specifically called here for the first shot, then just show me your hand if you want to take it. How do we ensure a more joined-up approach in Europe, especially given the challenge of the Green Deal? It's from Kathy Taylor, Director of Science, Cruelty-Free Europe. I think we touched on some of that already. Christian, how do we ensure a more joined-up approach within Europe, especially given the challenges of the Green Deal?
By, of course, by dialogue and by understanding well the problem. There is a technical side on the discussion on the issue that we are discussing, which, of course, is not always at the hand of the decision makers, at least in the European Parliament, but not only. Of course, when the discussion is with the European Commission, there the specialization and the expertise it's there, and of course it's a little bit a different institution than European Parliament. But it's important to have a dialogue. It's important to put everything in the perspective of the strategic goal, and the Green Deal, it's a very important strategic goal. Of course, Green Deal, it's not only about the energy transition, about the change of energy system, about heavy industry. It's a lot about agriculture, and transport also. But it's also a lot about what we're discussing today, to change totally the paradigm. So it's important, the dialogue, it's important to explain well the concepts and to take decision based on science, but on modern science and on the models of the future and not the models of the yesterday.
Thank you. I think Morris already touched on most of this anyway. So let's go with the next question, which is for Anna. Anna, the question is, you've covered the priority that the US EPA is giving NAMs. Can you please also comment on the priority which the US FDA and basic science academia are giving NAMs.eco, I'm not even sure what that is, ECO UK, and that's from Professor and Doctor of Medicine Horst Spielman at the Institute of Pharmacy.
So, not working at the US FDA, I won't speak for them, but I can tell you what I've observed through the ICFAM, the U.S. Interagency Coordinating Committee for the Validation of Alternative Methods, that ICFAM, the FDA is an active partner in. So the U.S. FDA does have a strong commitment to NAMs. In fact, last year, I believe they put out a brand new roadmap and strategic framework for how they're going to move away from the animals and bring in more in vitro approaches. I can tell you at the ICFAM level that I think one of the big differences of what we're doing in the US compared to what's going on in Europe is that our regulators who participate in ICFAM are also on steering committees and strategic groups supporting academic organizations. So, for example, the National Institute of Health has some small business innovation grants that they give to small businesses supporting new approach methods. And in fact, those will have steering committees made up of ICFAM regulatory scientists. So our regulators actually working directly with the innovative small businesses developing the new methods. So, we're working hard to make these connections that have been talked about by a couple of the panelists of, really connecting the regulators, the industry, but also the method developers.
Okay, thank you. This question maybe for Morris. Are we preaching to the converted right now? Who do we need to convert? And what priorities? And how do we do this? It's from Judy MacArthur-Clark, who we had on speaking earlier. Morris.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. I really enjoyed your presentation too, opening up. I mean, I guess I touched on it a little bit before in my last intervention. I agree with Judy. I mean, we are to some extent preaching to the converted, but my personal goal is to engage a broader community in this discussion to understand that they indeed have a stake in this discussion. This is not a peripheral issue. This is central. And I said I opened my talk basically saying, look, we've never had a chemical strategy in Europe. It's such a holistic and explicit one. So, there's never been a better time now to say, look, that's still just a strategy. It's backed up by a series of actions, highly ambitious actions that we need to pursue in the next 5 years. So I think really this is where the rubber hits the road. We really need now to have that discussion. But I come back to Judy's point, I think, which is in order for us to have a broader discussion, a sensible discussion with a broader community of stakeholders, we need to formulate the discussion. We need to engineer that discussion in a way where people understand what's at stake. And this isn't a toxicology issue per se. You know, this isn't even replacing animals discussion per se. This is about much broader socioeconomic objectives that we have. And you know, I believe too that if we manage to engage, you know, people at all levels, not just the scientific toxicological level. I mean, maybe in the last 10 years, if I was to make an observation, maybe we've been having too much discussion at that level and not enough discussion, you know, at the higher risk assessment, risk management. You know, how do we link the protection goals we have at policy level back down to information requirements and processes and procedures we have in the regulatory framework? And just if you allow me,
sure,
back to Anna's point about the OECD, etc. Look, you know, I'm a great believer in, you know, using the instruments we have rather than creating a whole lot of new ones. But that said, we need innovation in our processes. We need organizational entrepreneurship. We need to look again at these instruments that we've had in place for a long, long time that stood us in good stead. I mean, the OECD, you know, test guidelines program has done an incredible service to society, to the economy, to world trade, and we'd be mad to think about walking away from it. But that said, I agree with Anna that, you know, we need to change with the times, and not just, you know, in terms of you know, doing the better science, etc., but really looking at our processes and procedures and seeing are they fit for purpose.
Okay, let me bring in on the edge of that. Let me bring in the next question then, and maybe Patrick, you want to take this, and so to the whole panel. How can we use one chemical, one assessment approach globally in a consistent framework, such that we generate one data package which covers global needs, if that's entirely possible? This comes from Tina Mehta. She's the head of human health at Adama. Patrick.
Yeah, my understanding on the one chemical, one assessment proposal, or actually recommendation, which I agree with, is that we're still confronted with different authorities doing a different assessment on the same chemical, right? Giving it a different exposure scenario. You could have a group that is looking at cosmetics. The same chemical could be looked at, you know, in the context of detergents, etc. And maybe it would be better to have a single assessment, which I would agree with across all of the exposure scenarios. But it really needs to start, in my opinion, with exposure. Right? We have, and this is part of the paradigm shift that is probably needed within Europe. You know, there's a danger that we start with a hazard, and then we extract that hazard to all of the exposure scenarios which exist. And that will be a big, big impairment to innovation, which I know is another, you know, ultimate goal for Europe. So we need to start with the exposure. And then I strongly believe into one chemical, one assessment, maybe ideally with one authority, right? Where we can have an open dialogue on what the exposures are, what the new insights from the new biologically based methods are, and really integrate them into the one assessment, one chemical. So in summary, Brian, very supportive. But I think the devil will be in the details, how it will be executed. And in my opinion, exposure is a key element on how we need to start thinking about it.
One chemical, one assessment authority. Let's just sum up for the day. And anybody else want a quick answer in this? I have 2 more questions and 3 minutes to go through. Anna, nobody else on this? Okay, let me take the next question.
Yeah, no, I did. Sorry, I wanted to unmute myself. So, I actually support what Tina's saying there. So what we see in the pharmaceutical space with the ICH and the ICH test guidelines is that there is broad worldwide harmonization in how pharmaceuticals are regulated, at least in terms of their data needs. That you see a consistent set of data needs, a consistent set of science questions around toxicology for pharmaceuticals. But in our worldwide, our agrochemical, biocide, and also industrial chemical regulations, we lack that sort of ICH-like platform that provides another level of harmonization. And I think it's an area where we could should really start thinking about are there ways to build something ICH-like in our chemical space to support not only harmonization, but also to support the development of NAMs, the moving away from animals, because we're really not going to make worldwide progress until we're all on the same page about what the data needs are, where the NAMs are in terms of their readiness for use.
Thank you, Anna. Let's go to the next question, and anybody who wants to answer just a quick answer. The EU continues to drive a hazard-based approach to safety testing rather than the risk-based approach that we see in the USA. This sustains significant, unnecessary animal testing. How can we help change this? This is from Phil Botham. Christian, quick answer on that?
This is what we are discussing now, no? To go a little bit in a different model, to reduce what Mr. Phil Botham rightly says, that it's an unnecessary animal testing, and to go in the other direction. This is what we could do via the legislation that we are debating, via changing the mentalities, changing the models. That's why we have this conversation today, and that's why we are working together in order to change
you may
things.
drop off and go to your ITRE committee, which is calling you just now. So thank you very much to Christian Borsoi. And we're just going to wrap up now with the rest of the panel as well, so you'll miss anything else. And to the rest of the panel as well, let's give 20 seconds each for your soundbite wrap up for today. Morris, key message.
Key message, you know, EPAA has stood the test of time. It was a very different world 15 years ago, but it's changed with the times, and I believe it's as relevant as ever. Trust is fundamental to progress, and EPAA has provided an environment, an ecosystem where trust can be built between the various communities engaged in this whole endeavor. So that would be my take-home message.
Thank you. Anna.
I just want to thank the organizers in EPAA for inviting me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I echo what Maurice said, that EPAA is really poised to really be a strong force in changing the world, and because you do have that strong commitment to bring everyone together of different points of view and different backgrounds to make change. So I want to congratulate you on 15 years and look forward to your new project on carcinogenicity and AgChem. So I'm looking forward to participating in that, actually.
Thank you. And last word to Patrick.
Thank you, Brian. I'd like to stick with the title of my presentation. The three elements which are really needed here is the innovation, the collaboration, and the partnerships, which I think EPAA stands for. My request and our suggestion actually to get going is let's pick 3 test use cases and let's work it out. I think we have to build the confidence, and we can only build the confidence with real information, with real data that we can share at the highest levels to show that we have the confidence in what we do. And I think then the rest will follow. Thank you.
Build the confidence, keep it real. Thank you to all of you. And before I just hand over to Franz and to Carlo to conclude for today. So thank you to all of our panelists, all the speakers that I've had the pleasure to interact with today. It's been a great conversation. And now let me hand over to Franz and to Carlo. And they just on the screen.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to close this annual conference of the EPAA. This is the 15th annual conference of our Partnership for Alternatives to Animal Testing, and is the time to close. Despite the online format, which is certainly not ideal for such a major conference, I think that we have seen today a strong sign of the partnership. It is alive and kicking. although we had to shorten the program considerably, we were able to keep the core elements of our gathering, and we enjoyed this platform for presenting our work, reporting on progress in non-animal testing, and for exchange of experiences and knowledge amongst the partner and with the wider international community that is interested and actively working on the refinement, reduction, and replacement of animal methods. And we saw again today that the EPAA is a very active part of that community. Since 15 years, we are promoting with all the means at our hands the research for new methods, for refinement and reduction. We are promoting the translation of these new methods into practice, and we are working tirelessly to share the knowledge, expertise, and experience with non-animal methods and refined procedures with all stakeholders, be it in the European Union member states, European neighboring countries, or other regions of the globe. As a stakeholder-driven public-private partnership, we are quite unique in this community. And I am really happy to see that all EPAA members, European Commission, industry, and stakeholders alike, remain fully engaged via its intergroup on animal welfare. A special thanks to Mr. Christian Musoi and Sirpa Pietikainen for her invaluable cooperation through the years. 15 years already. Unfortunately, we could not honor this anniversary by real celebration, but we will do that next year. Speaking of which, we are also very much looking forward to the 11th World Congress, where the partnership will play a major role. But before closing, I would like to give the floor to my advisor, Franz Lampelmayer, the Commission co-chair of the EPAA, for a personal announcement. Please, Franz.
To make, and as many of you will know by now, I have a change of jobs in sight and will soon do that. And that means, unfortunately, that I have to leave also the co-chair of the EPAA. I'm looking forward, of course, to the new assignment and the challenge attached to it, but at the same time, it is not without regret, with even a great regret, that I say goodbye to the partnership, to this partnership that I've co-chaired with Rob Rogeband during the last 2 years. I will not keep you any longer, just to say a big thank you to all of you and to all those who have helped me in this adventure. I found enormous motivation, knowledge, and spirit with the members from both groups. And I found true friends also in this very special community of alternatives in toxicology and regulatory testing. My very special thanks, of course, go to the two secretariats, Irene and Svonimir from the industry side, and Diane and Sophie. The four of them have really supported me on a daily basis to implement the ambitious program of work that we have given ourselves in the EPAA. Special thanks, of course, also to my co-chair, Rob Rogeband, but also to all the active members of the steering committee and the Mirror Group. And I can assure you that together we have achieved a lot, and I really enjoyed every moment of it. I said I regret leaving, but I'm also very confident that for the future of the EPAA, things will go well. We have been preparing this future together, as I said, and I share the optimism that we heard also today from the various speakers. I'm also optimistic because I can leaving the EPAA in good hands with Rob Rogeband continuing as industry co-chair, and from the Commission side, Salvatore D'Acunto and Roman Mokri taking over, and they have both been actually active members of the steering committee in the past years. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and I hope to see you soon. Stay safe.